1, 2, 1, 2, test 1, 2. We are doing a mic check. 1, 2, thank you for everyone being here this morning. It is a great day. Today is Tuesday. We are looking forward to having everyone here today. Check 1, 2. 1, 2. Just bring the master down. Master output on the board. Just bring it down to the stream. 1, 2. 1, 2. Test, test. 1, 2. Thank you for being here today. Mic check. 1, 2. It's a great day. 1, 2. Testing 1, testing 2. 1, 2, check, check. Today, 1, 2. 1, 2, let's do a quick fix, y'all. Let's go. Check, check, check. Just gain it down or bring your master down and balance it out. Test 1, 2, 2. Good job. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, check, check, 1, 2, mic check, test 1. Testing 1, testing 2. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check 1, 2. Okay, doors are opening, music up in the house. We got to stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the first few days. Special thanks to all the people that I met last night utilizing my new networking skills from Kimberly. Right, thank you. I hope you met and connected with new colleagues and resources. We have another full day of great sessions, including our in-depth workshops this afternoon. Remember, please use the Cvent mobile app to get the latest updates, messages, and to ask questions during the sessions. Speaking of asking questions, speaking of messages, that's what I meant. I want to make sure that you're aware that when you go into the app, in the right-hand corner where the profile button is, there is where you can see your messages. I spoke to someone last night. I know at least about 13 of you have messages you haven't seen yet. So be sure that's how you can connect with other folks here at the conference. If you need any help with the app, feel free to ask myself or anyone else here at DRJ. We want to make sure that you are getting the best possible interaction with the app and utilizing it to its full capacity here during the conference. Be sure to complete the session survey. I keep repeating myself there, but we really want to make sure we get your feedback so we know what you like and what you didn't like so that we can bring you the best conference next time. Remember that tomorrow there will be an attendance prize draw at the beginning of General Session 9, and all eligible attendees are automatically registered, but you must be present to win. And you will win a free conference pass to 2025 conference. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, speaking of networking, who doesn't know Tracy Rice? We all know who Tracy Rice is, an accomplished industry leader and a passionate purchaser of Michael Kors stuff. I just learned this morning. Yes, she could teach a master class in building relationships. I also learned this morning that she has won the BCI Personality of the Year 3 times. And she very kindly pointed out, well, they don't let me win anymore. Now I'm just in the Hall of Fame. Just humble brag there, guys, humble brag. Joining Tracy is Catherine Morgan, who by her own admission said she's been following Tracy around since 2018. It's not a bad gig. It's not a bad gig. Morgan's expertise and contribution to the community has made her a very trusted advisor in the industry. Please help me welcome Tracy and Catherine. Well done, well done.
Thank you. I think if Melissa and I both taught the master class, that would be really interesting. What do you think? Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session. Hopefully we're going to see some more folks come in and join us this morning. But thank you to all of you for this opportunity to lead the general session this morning with my colleague, Catherine.
Oh, thank you, Tracy.
I'm not going to reintroduce ourselves because Melissa did such a wonderful job of it, but I did want to say that DRJ is one of my favorite conferences. I have been attending DRJ since 1999, and I've spoken several times at DRJ. I've spoken on behalf of Fusion, I've spoken on behalf of the DRJ mentoring program, and I've also spoken on career resilience. But today, I'm going to talk to you about a different topic, something that's really exciting for me and Catherine to share with you today. So, today I'm going to talk to you about one of the single most underestimated challenges that all of us as resilience practitioners and professionals deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that challenge is you. Yes, it's you and me and Catherine, the person to your right, the person to your left, the person behind you, and the person in front of you. It's us, humans. How we as humans make decisions is the most important factor in your business continuity and resilience programs. And believe it or not, because it's the most important factor, I'm here to tell you, it's somewhat flawed. Because despite all of our experience, all of our communication skills, all of our team dynamics, tabletops and testing, when people are under pressure, we often revert back. And we revert back to those ingrained behaviors that lead us to make less than optimal decisions. So consider this. In the midst of the madness of an incident, you're under pressure, you're facing uncertainties, you have information everywhere, and perhaps information nowhere. Are you really equipped to quickly make the necessary decisions? This isn't a poll, it's a thought bubble. Sip your Starbucks, there'll be polls coming later. At Fusion, we've been thinking about this. We've been considering this dynamic for some time. And in my experience, I've seen over and over again companies who are looking for a better solution, they find themselves in a very predictable pattern. They've kind of fallen into this pattern where there's a crisis or some kind of emergency situation and no one reaches for that response plan. No one reaches for the response plan because maybe they didn't think about it, maybe it doesn't exist, maybe it's not complete, maybe there's no faith in the content of that plan, and this can lead to a failed response. And the effects of a failed response will be felt not only internally, but externally, perhaps by your customers. And externally, perhaps damage your company's brand. And it's really a vicious cycle because executives who you're trying to get support from, you're trying to get more investment from, they look at that response that didn't go well and they go, didn't work the last time, not working this time. I don't see any value in the program.
Yeah.
And why would they? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. So we found in our research and experience in talking with different companies that there is a possible way to come out of this cycle. And so today we're going to consider 3 different things. Number 1, is our information complete and accurate? Number 2, have we organized and packaged that information in an effective way where it can help us on a day-to-day operational basis and also when we're in crisis mode? And number 3, have I assembled and trained a team that are willing and able to execute in both modes? Catherine, why do programs fail?
Yes. Well, you know what, Tracy? Everything you just laid out, it's the reason why companies come to us, right? They've experienced something that has happened that's really highlighted a gap in the foundation of their data. So when do the programs fail? It's about taking a look at the operations, understanding where those data points sit within the organization and pulling them together for complete visibility, right? But the problem with that is we don't always have access to that information. You have misinformation, incomplete information. Maybe that leads to incomplete response plans. And then you push to try to get access to pull everything together and get that support. But sometimes it's hard to get that internal buy-in. Then what happens, right? Disruption. We have a botched response. And I'm sitting there at 2 a.m. trying to place an online order and I can't. What does that mean for us though? Bad customer experience, right? Maybe we have loss of revenue, loss of reputation. The program ultimately fails. And we wonder why we don't get that support, right? So what are people saying though? Well, I mean, I speak with many of our customers every single day, our partners, even regulators, right, at industry events. And guess what? They're all saying the same thing, right? Customers are dealing with disconnected data. There's a real connection gap in that foundation of what they're trying to work with. And that provides challenges across the business as a whole. I sit in sessions with my customers and even some of their most trusted partners, right? Thought leaders, folks that are supposed to be leading the way, experts to really back it all up. Maybe the McKinseys, the PwCs, the Deloittes, DRJ, right? And everyone's backing that up. It's really important that we have a connected program for our overall resilience. And they're pointing out the gaps, but it's hard to pull all of that together. Finally, regulators know it too. They're pushing us towards adopting other programs like technology for third-party risk management, which should give us insight to other areas of the business that maybe we didn't tap into before because we were very focused on core resilience. Everyone's saying the same thing. So let's take a beat. We do have a poll up on our screen, right? And you know, with all the companies that I worked with over the years, Tracy, we do know what that right answer is. It's testing, collaborating, advanced planning, but it's still so hard for us to get investment, both time and dollars, to build a stronger program. It comes back to the biggest challenges of us all, which Tracy blamed us for earlier, right? It's us, it's humans. Of course, it makes sense.
Well, don't be too hard on everyone.
Well, you started it.
It's not people in the way that you may be thinking. It's not that people don't know that there's a better way. We know that there's a better way. It's just that our brains are wired to think a certain way. And the bias and the habits, they get in the way of us making better decisions. Can we show the poll?
Yes. I was wondering the same.
I think it's behind us.
Oh, there it is. I can't see it from here.
There we go.
All right, yes, we all have gaps. Case in point. Let's put some names to these biases, though, shall we? Right? We're talking about everything that we face on our day-to-day basis, but I'd like to call out 3 phenomena. I'd like to name them. Things that we all deal with, whether that's work, personal, and I really hope that, like what we talk about today, it can help us with the challenges that we face day to day, right? Help us with our own biases, help us make better decisions. And I'm going to start with status quo bias. Simply put, we've always done it that way, right? People stick with what they know. Maybe it is, not going for a promotion because it feels scary and unknown, and you're comfortable with where you're at. Maybe it's renewing a vendor contract, continuing to go down the path, just dropping into the renewal and not taking a look at what else might be out there, because change can be challenging. Change is scary. And maybe it's too cumbersome to switch to a new tool or platform, even though we know it might be good for us. Maybe it's pulling in other people to work on a project, right? And just not wanting to experience those unknowns of what it might be like to work with someone else. I'm not recommending that we all are complacent and be complacent, but let's face it, sometimes sticking our head in the sand is a lot harder than dealing with the challenge of embracing something new, spearheading something new. Maybe you're stuck in a job or a relationship that, you've been in for so long, so why bother changing? We can talk about that one over a cocktail. Research backs it up, though. In '88, it was found that the majority of people disproportionately stick with the status quo. But with how quickly things are changing, that's a really scary thought.
Well, the second one is bounded rationality.
Yes, it is.
And bounded rationality is a couple of things. First of all, if you are of the Scottish dialect, you have to practice saying that. And I think Catherine chose to lead with status quo biases just to mess with me. So now that I've mastered saying it, I'm going to say it a lot. So it's a bit of a tongue twister, as we would say. But bounded rationality is a theory that describes how people make decisions that are not quite rational. And we've all been there, haven't we? But they're decisions that are based on the knowledge that we have at that time. And so we only know what we know. And sometimes that's okay. When you're trying to get the kids ready and off to school in the morning, that's maybe we skip things and maybe we make decisions on the way out the door. If we're running late and we run into Starbucks for a drink, we just order whatever. It doesn't really have a major impact. But if we're running an incident, we're in crisis mode, and there's just a lot of madness going on around us, we don't have the information at our fingertips that we really need to make a decision. Yet sometimes we have to go ahead and make that decision. And sometimes you're in an incident that really matters. Many of you will have been affected by the recent CrowdStrike outage. And so once you got your arms around what was happening, and once you understood what the impact was, you had to make some very informed, rational decisions in which to prioritize how you're going to bring all those systems up in the right order with the least impact to your operations and to your customers. They're important decisions. If you don't have enough information to make a good decision in that situation, it has a massive impact. And so we have always done it that way, combined with we only know what we know, starts to snowball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The last is threat rigidity. We can adapt during a crisis, right? When people or organizations respond to challenges or threats with what they know and become resistant to change. These are people that when innovation is needed, push back with, but we've always done it this way, right? This just isn't going to cut it in a world that's changing as quickly as ours. We've all faced this. When the pandemic happened, our threat rigidity bias was tested. Some organizations were able to pivot. We all had to learn how to work remotely. Me personally, I had my first son in June 2020, and nothing could prepare me for bringing a baby into the world at that time. I had to flex. My family really had to flex. We all had to flex. Look at the hospitality business. Those who thrived, innovated, and adopted technology and learned new ways. Those that didn't went out of business. Banks had to close any of their local branches, and we still managed to survive. We still managed to keep things going. So we all know we can pivot, right? And move past that threat rigidity when we need to. But the point is being aware of it in our day-to-day and not just handling it at the time of severe disruption.
So if you take these three concepts and you bring them all together, it's quite the recipe for disaster. When you're faced with a crisis, you stick with what you know, use that information to make less than optimal decisions. It's all driven by a fear that's going to lead you to be less open and flexible to other possibilities. It truly is a recipe for disaster.
Right. And all of it is really driven by change. Change in data, change in our social situation, change in the globe. And it's so important that we still figure out how to flex and deal with that on a day-to-day basis and when things come up as surprises. Here's a quote.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, she went too fast. See, she changed on me too fast. Here's a quote by E.D. Rama. Our world is defined by the pace of change. We can all change the world. Well, how can we change? How can we move past this? How can we move past biased decision-making? If we're limited by misinformation, how can we go ahead and move forward and embrace a culture of resilience? Status quo bias should do that for us, right? Bounded rationality, the point is to really improve the decision-making capabilities. And threat rigidity, we want to be able to embrace and adopt technology, so that way we have the ability of accessing dynamic data.
And I like to think of this in a slightly different way, maybe through another lens: people, process, technology.
Yes.
That's something we're all very, very familiar with. Well, one of the things that we do enjoy about presenting at DRJ is that it's really interesting to lay out some of our challenges, talk about our challenges, but it's also, I think, very important to then talk about strategies to overcome these challenges. And now that we've kind of teed up how we are seeing these human decision-making be such a challenge in the resilience industry, we want to spend some time talking about strategies that you can implement to help you overcome those challenges. And my goal here, and our goal here, is for all of you to be able to understand action items, take them back to your office and be able to implement them into your program as a takeaway. So you want to start with status quo biases? Or is this my slide?
That's your slide.
All right, inconsistent. I'll start.
Tell us a story, Tracy, on status quo bias.
I love storytelling, so I will tell a story. Okay, status quo bias. First of all, leadership and communication.
Yeah.
One of my favorite topics to share with our customer community is this concept of resilience as a culture and embedding resilience into the fabric of your organization. And we are very fortunate to work with a global insurance company who I think has done something really fascinating with their program. And I want to share that with all of you today, and hopefully we'll see some light bulbs go off and you go, wow, why don't we do that? That's fantastic. So this company was undertaking a project that came down from leadership for digital transformation throughout the entire company. So it was a massive initiative. And what they did was they looked at their core values across the organization, and they decided that one of their core values was going to be resilience. And so by doing this, they gave their program visibility. They gave it awareness. They demonstrated that they had sponsorship and support and investment from the top down. And that message got to every single employee in the organization. We're all familiar with doing annual reviews, biannual reviews. We all know our organization's core values. When we go to work every morning, we want to demonstrate and live those core values as part of our role in the organization. And so what they did, they didn't necessarily have everyone doing a BIA or building a plan, but what they did was they put resilience top of mind for every single employee in the organization, and it moved the needle. In fact, if you go to their website, there's a banner that says, "We are resilient," and it scrolls along the top of the website. Very, very cool. I'd love to see more of you think about using resilience as a core value. The second thing is involvement and empowerment. And, I like to talk about something called the value exchange. So when we involve different leaders around the organization in activities such as BIAs or risk assessments, we're gathering information from them. Often, I see a mistake being made is that that's just a one-way street, when you can easily make it a two-way street, something I like to call the value exchange. So if you give me information, I'm going to marry it up and connect it to other data, and I'm going to give you something of value to you, back to you. And so there's this dynamic that changes where we're involving and we're empowering other business leaders throughout the organization. And then finally, there's training and support. So if we're creating brand awareness for the program within the organization, the third one is to think about the continual training. And I've seen training done so well by some organizations. I think the best tip that I could give all of you when you think about training is make sure it fits the culture of your organization. So if you're like a fun, tech company, make sure you brand it, use all the colors, but make the training messaging aligned to the culture of your organization. So if you're a tech company, make it kind of fun and hip and use all the words that are buzzy within the organization. Different for healthcare, different for financial services, different for retail. But don't use just mainstream training. Make sure that you're making that message really sticky. So some of my thoughts on strategies for status quo bias. Catherine's given me bounded rationality again, and I think she's doing this just to punish me. But again, I have mastered the art, Catherine. So strategies to overcome bounded rationality. The first one is enhancing information availability. And again, I want to tell a story of one organization that I work really, really closely with. So this is a global manufacturing company who have many, many products that they manufacture in sites all around the world. And so during the geopolitical event in Europe that started now many years ago and is still going on, they were faced with a duty of care to identify employees that were in dangerous areas in the Ukraine, identify them and execute a plan to remove them from that country safely. Mm-hmm. And using data, connected data, and using the knowledge and putting aside that irrational thinking, they were able to identify those personnel and get them to safe accommodation and out of the country. It didn't stop there, because after that, they were then approached by their leadership, and their leadership said, we need to identify any ties to Russia that this organization has as we think about removing people, manufacturing, everything out of the country. So that was a really big ask. How did they do that? Again, they did that with knowledge, connected data. They were able to identify manufacturing locations, what products were made in those locations, what critical processes were in those locations, the personnel, the vendors, the supply chain, all of those interconnected, important pieces of data. They were also able to assess not only the operational impact
of taking their business out of Russia, but they were able to assess what the financial impact would be should they choose to do so. It goes beyond that, because then when they did choose to pull out, they had to make a plan for work transference. And they had to identify manufacturing locations that had the specialized equipment to be able to manufacture those products and continue bringing them to market. Obviously, you can't just rip and replace and do it all at once. You have to make decisions. You have to prioritize, what steps you would take first, and also what is most important. So a couple of stories there that I think are really demonstrate how you can overcome bounded rationality by digging deep and using the interconnected data that you have in your resilience program. The second one is establishing a chain of command and communication around being able to operate these frameworks. Communication is everything. I don't think we talk about it enough. And it's not just about recognizing your effective processes, it's about actually executing on them. And we do this through fostering a learning culture. There's a real favorite Chinese proverb that I like to use. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I will learn. And this is something that is always top of mind for me. I think it's really, really important. We all have different communication styles. We also have different learning styles. And I think that if you take that into consideration when you're fostering a learning culture, then you can overcome some of the challenges that we face. Catherine.
I think you say bounded rationality so lovely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Involve me and I will learn. It's the epitome of threat rigidity, right? The fear of trying something new. It's what we do as parents. We teach our kids to crawl, walk, run. The other day, I'm sure many of you might be familiar with this, but I took my boys to ninja camp. And they were jumping off of balance beams with no fear. We can't be afraid to fall, right? Why, as adults, are we so complacent? We need to think like kids again. Use our imaginations to adapt and grow and learn other ways. I think about an incident with a customer during COVID, yet again, because we learned so much then. They knew that it was going to be a massive hit to India. It was coming. They needed to understand what the options were to be able to transfer work. That was very important to their leadership. Important to stay up and running with no interruption to their customer. They weren't able to do this. They looked at their options. They didn't have an answer to keep visibility on how they could keep things up and running. We were able to help them. We did that by innovating with technology, empowering their leadership to make informed decisions in the time of disruption. And that's really what threat rigidity is all about, how we get past that, being empowered. So what do y'all think? We've talked a lot about different biases, right? Tracy's blamed us a number of times for being the problem. But do any of these resonate within your organization? Can you put a name now, whether that's status quo, bounded, threat, to some of these things that you see, whether that is in your own program or, you know, in day to day? There we go.
Oh, we have some non-believers in the room, Catherine. None of the above.
4%, 4%.
I bet that's the entire
Oh,
Fusion
no, it
team.
went up.
It's the Fusion team. They're just messing with us, I think.
To be expected. I think they're just trying to make things challenging. How are we going to adapt and learn, Trace? But I mean, I think it's to be expected status quo.
Yep. So all three of these decision-making architectures, they're centered around culture. And culture is everything. I'm sure many of you in the room today have had more than one job in your career. You've worked for more than one organization. So I'm sure you've experienced different cultures, especially if you've worked in different industry verticals. Because I truly believe that culture can be associated with different industry verticals. But at the end of the day, you have an opportunity to affect culture. And I shared an example with you earlier, but Catherine and I, we kind of fought over who was going to present this slide. And so we couldn't resolve that. So we're just going to have our little battle here on stage. And I had the clicker, so I'm going to start it off.
Don't let her fool you. She likes talking.
Aligning your program objectives to your organizational mission. This is so important. You know, when you take on a new role with your new organization, the first thing you should do is step back and start to think, I need to understand this organization, right? Who are the leadership team? What is the vision? What is the mission statement? What are the core values? One of the best things you can do is, as a resilience professional, look at your program and start to think about how you better align that program to the mission statement and all the core values. Do not try to swim upstream, right? You have to make that alignment. And so you think about the knowledge that you're going to get, right? You're going to embrace that. And you start to design the principles of your resilience program. What I would do is I'd look at what are my organizational goals for the year. And once you understand the goals and objectives, you have to tie every single thing that you do in resilience to one of those goals. And it's not easy to do, but I've seen some programs do this so well that the talk track changes. And so right now, if you got in an elevator with your CEO and they said, hey, what do you do? What would your answer be? I'm a business continuity planner. Oh, really? That's cool. Okay, see you later.
What does that mean?
No. I help retain customers.
Yep.
I help meet our revenue goals, right? There's lots of different answers that you can come up with depending on who your organization is, what their mission is, what their values are. But your answers have to start to change. You have to start to really create your own language and your own talk track around it.
But then once you've identified how that's best going to align with you, and you have real business outcomes that you want to drive forward, how are you going to tie that back to results? So taking that mission statement, taking those values from the company and being able to digest what does that mean for our part of the business and what we do from a resilience perspective, and then tie those into actual results that you can go back to and reference when you are pulled into that elevator talking about what you do, right?
Awesome. This is Catherine's favorite slide. So, what are the biggest obstacles to a successful program? Well, we believe that one of them is the connection gap. The connection gap leads to poor decisions.
Yes, and I know we've been a bit doom and gloom, but the idea is that take the things that we're going to lay out in this slide as things that you can look at to see, gut check your own program. First, starting with that connection gap. Connection gaps are the missing links. They're the data, the culture that might be driving the wrong decisions for your business. First, starting with asking yourself, is the information that we have packaged effectively so we can drive decisions daily and in a crisis?
And so when we say packaged effectively,
Yes.
so the way I like to think of this is in order to really understand how our organizations work on a day-to-day basis, we need to understand our day-to-day operations, our critical processes, and our reliance on technology. Not in crisis mode, in day-to-day operational mode. Unless we understand that, we're never going to understand where it might break and where we have those potential gaps and those potential risks. And so often I hear companies go straight to the building plans. And I feel like they've missed a step because it's not necessarily about building plans until you understand fundamentally how your organization performs and operates on a day-to-day basis. So I see them as a kind of now mode and a then mode, and then being some kind of interruption or crisis, Catherine.
Yeah. And then ask yourself, is your team built to operate in this model? Going back to what we talked about, building a culture of resilience, do the executives sponsor the program? Has that culture been built for you to really understand what you're driving forward? And do you have the right team? Are they enabled to be able to do that with technology, to Tracy's point?
Yeah, and when we started this conversation earlier, we started with some examples of the executive team asking questions during an interruption. Are we affected? What is the impact? When are we going to be back up and running? Are our customers impacted? Oh my goodness, is this in the media already? And the list goes on and on and on. And involving your executives or your stakeholders in a more proactive way ahead of time and demonstrating the value of your program, so important. You don't want your only interaction to be when you're in crisis mode and you're unable to answer some of those questions. And so that involvement early in that exchange of information, so important.
Finally, is your information complete and accurate at all times? I mean, this is a big part of the gap, in my opinion. Are you getting that data once? Is it constant? Is it integrated? What happens if it needs to get updated, right? Is the information accurate that you have at your fingertips right now? And that really does go back to technology and innovation and that missing piece and how our information can be packaged.
But I also think if we were standing here and it was 1999
Yeah.
right? And we were, you know, on main stage at DRJ. It would be a harder conversation to have about, is my information up to date? Is my information accurate? Because technology back then, anyone remember LANs and WANs and client-server architecture? And I don't even think we had the internet back then. That was hard, right? That was hard to keep your information up to date and accurate. But change days now.
Well,
We can integrate data and, you know, automate feeds and do all sorts of fancy stuff that, you know, doesn't really require us. Set it and forget it. So keeping the information up to date and accurate is a lot easier now and possible than ever before.
true, but it does go back to understanding your operations, right?
Yeah.
Even back then, you know, you still need to be able to pivot and have that information accessible to you. And if you don't know where it sits and how your organization runs operationally, then what do you have? There we go. Let's take a look at a few numbers. Only 16% of companies believe their organization is actually prepared to anticipate internal shocks and disruptions. 58% of businesses say embedding resilience into the fabric of the organization is a top challenge for them in implementing a program. 30% of businesses haven't even considered building a program. That's shocking. 33% of leaders say isolated initiatives are a challenge to strengthen resilience. And only 20% of programs are fully integrated. There's a real connection gap.
So I'm going to go back to the CrowdStrike outage, because I talked to a lot of companies after this event, and I asked them, were you impacted? Yes, no. Were you impacted directly? Were you impacted indirectly through some of your critical vendors? And got some feedback on how they responded if they were impacted, and what were some of their stories. Did it go fairly smoothly? Did they have the information that they needed at the time of incident to be able to respond in a well-informed and timely manner? And I'll tell you, I was really surprised. I was really surprised at how many organizations almost cast it aside and said, oh, Tracy, that was an IT outage. And that just kind of blew my mind. Was it really just an IT outage? I just don't believe that. How can it be just an IT outage when in banking, transactions weren't clearing? In retail, some stores weren't even able to open. Some stores were open, but weren't able to actually allow you to pay for your merchandise. Oh, come in and look, but we can't let you pay for that today. And that was actually one of my experiences. Transportation. Train services were interrupted. Planes created havoc on a global basis. And then in healthcare, so many scheduled for critical surgeries that couldn't happen. So for those people who just treated this as an IT outage, I had to disagree, put my foot down and go, I don't believe that. Yes, it required your DR team to go and execute, right? It required them to do the work, but the impact on the business was just immense. And we heard from many companies that executives were just, all over them. And of course, right? Because the executives woke up in the morning, got their iPhone out, and they were like, ooh, what's this? Oh, plane's not flying, da, 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 da. Are we okay? Hey, are we okay? Are our channels broadcasting? Well, 9 out of 10 of them are, but we're having a problem with one. Well, how long is it going to be before that's back online? Don't know. Well, what caused it? Don't know. Well, what are you going to do about it? Don't know. Okay, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. And to be in that situation is really scary. But we don't know what's going to happen next week. CrowdStrike is just one of many, right? Another CrowdStrike is just right around the corner. And it's a really good example of the message that we're sharing today. I mean, I just feel that if you were unable to make a really solid, trustworthy, informed decision, then it was probably because of one of these 3 decision-making biases that we shared with you today. So maybe your thoughts on the original question that we asked, what seems like hours ago. I feel like I've been up here for hours. We asked you, are you equipped to quickly make the necessary decisions during an incident? Maybe your thoughts are just a little bit different now. But we hope you enjoyed the presentation today. We really want you to focus on culture of resilience, effective processes, dynamic and current data. And we hope that we've shared some strategies that are really actionable, that you can take back to the office and start to improve your program with some of these ideas. There's also no better place that you could be right now, right? You're at the DRJ conference. And so I'm hoping that this was thought-provoking for you and that it's, got some ideas flowing. And you're with hundreds of other industry experts here. There's networking sessions, there's other interactive sessions. I know there's several parties going on tonight. Maybe you can ask your fellow attendees, what are you doing, with your program? Do you feel like you have a culture of resilience? And have some open conversation around that. So we've thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity of being here today, and we hope that you enjoyed the content and have a wonderful rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Melissa took so long with the introductions that we don't have time for questions. But
You'll see us at the booth. We'll be there all day.
you can find Catherine and I. We'll be walking the hallways. We'll be in the exhibition hall at the Fusion booth. So please come chat with us. We'd love to have more conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, my dear.
Way to just throw me under the bus.
Had to.
All right, thank you very, very much. One thing I wanted to point out before I let you guys go for coffee, really enjoyed that. And how many of you have been seen on social media, on our LinkedIn feeds? Resilience is becoming quite a buzzword. You're hearing it throughout with different executive leaderships, they're posting that. And I really appreciated that point. We have been resilience professionals. Let's take that word back. Let's help them be resilient and let them know we've been doing this for a long time. We can definitely help you and the organization be more resilient. All right, like I said, there is some coffee outside. We are going to break and we will be back at 9:15. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily.
Okay, everyone, we are back for our second session. No intro, but I will do a little bit of one. Regina Phelps is an internationally recognized thought leader in crisis management, exercise design, and pandemic planning. Since 1982, she has provided clients with consultation, training, and speaking services on 5 continents. She is the author of 1 Crisis Management and 3 exercise books, all available on Amazon and available here. She will be right outside after this, selling books and able to sign them for you if you'd like. Please help me welcome Regina. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, first of all, for that kind introduction. And good morning to everybody. It is a great pleasure to be here at DRJ Fall in our new city, in our new venue. And what I'm going to be talking about today is an interesting topic. And I want to start with the phrase, may you live in interesting times. As you probably know, this is actually a curse. And it's attributed to an ancient Chinese proverb. But being the curious person that I am, I, of course, did a bunch of research. Turns out, there's no proverb. It's actually a great piece of mis or disinformation, depending on how you look at it. But when you look at it, it really does describe the moment. Now, that phrase became really popular in the 1930s. And that was because in the UK, and it was actually a bunch of politicians started using it with frequency in the UK, and it was because they were looking over the channel into Europe and the rising and the growth of fascism and Nazism. And that's how it really became a popular phrase. And when you look at what's going on in the world around us with so many threats, I thought it would be a great way for us to start this talk. But then I have another question for you, which is, how do you plan for them? So let's dig in. I have a bunch of things I'm going to talk about. And when you look at my slides today, I have actually packed them with a lot of information, primarily because my hope is that I'm going to incentivize you to actually really take this home and really do some work with this material, because I think it is such an important issue. So we're doing a few polls today, just so I can hear and see what's on your mind. So if you don't have your phone available to you, you want to pull that out so you can go to the poll section for my talk today, and we can ask you a series of questions. There's actually 4 poll questions. One of them has 2 parts, and we'll dig in with that shortly. So I want to start, first of all, with the word that I believe describes the moment of the day. I've used this a lot in talks, but I think it really exemplifies where we are. And that's the word polycrisis. I didn't come up with this great term. I think it's actually a very cool one. But it really exemplifies where we are. And it really looks at this. And that is that the fact that there are so many things going on right now today in the world, and many of them become interconnected, and they become very intertwined, and they begin to build with each other, worsening the next. And you certainly saw that with the war in Ukraine and all of the ramifications of that particular invasion. Oops, let me back up. So when you look at this, what happens is that present and future risks begin to actually engage with each other. And so what we have to be thinking about as professionals is, what are we going to do about that as we look at our increasing world of polycrises? So I'm going to talk about 8 threats today. And so as I'm going along, you might be saying to me like, Regina, this is not going to happen, or I am in a business that only has one location, or maybe it's not going to be that big of a deal for me. And what I would say to you is to remember COVID. And remember that there was a disease that started in China, and all of a sudden it shut down the world. And that's what I want you to be thinking about, is that many of these threats may not seem like it may impact you directly, but over time it can in the polycrisis world that we live in. So let me tick through each one of these 8. The first one is what I call, it's mine and not yours. This is going on all over the world. There are lots of land threats and land grabs going on in many different places. There are many different wars going on. So for example, just the top that came to my mind as I was writing this talk, of course, the Russian-Ukraine war, which has been going on now for over 2.5 years. The war in the Middle East, which is getting incredibly horrible as the day goes by. There's the issue of the war in Gaza, the October 7th attacks in Israel, the emerging war in Lebanon. And so the opportunity for this to create a major war in the Middle East increases every single day. Now, that also has to do with things that are going on the other side of the world, which is China. And China's really been sort of saber rattling to a whole bunch of people lately. And that, of course, is starting with Taiwan. Now, you may say, why is that little piece of dirt right next to China such a big deal? Taiwan, if you're not familiar, is the home of TSMC. They produce 60% of all the chips in the world and 90% of all of the high-grade chips that are very sophisticated, like the ones for AI. If Taiwan was to actually be invaded by the Chinese, part of their strategy is they would blow up those plants. Not China wouldn't do that, but TSMC would. And we would go into this dark hole. Many people speculate it could actually create a worldwide recession and a worldwide depression, because have you ever thought about how many chips there are in everything that you use? And so it's actually a huge deal. But China's also saber rattling with the Philippines, a bunch of other countries in the region, so the area is really unstable. There's also a lot going on in Africa, really driven a lot by the Russians. So there's a part of the African continent called the Sahel, which is where Sudan and many other countries are that are now having wars and many different issues going on. So there's incredible instability in Africa, which then creates many migrants because it is so incredibly unsafe there, and there's so much starvation. There's famine in Sudan, which has been going on for some time. So people are moving because that's what you do if you can't feed your family. There's lots of saber rattling with Estonia. Estonia's in NATO, so that's a little unnerving. Russia's been actually doing all kinds of bizarre things at the border with Estonia, trying to intimidate them. And then, of course, there's other stuff going on in South America, the Venezuela and Guyana. There's so much happening. Now, as you can take a moment and look at this map, that just gives you an idea of where some of the most serious conflicts are. And as you can see, they're kind of all over the place. And notice there's a couple of dots there in America. And that's because of the forecast of the potential for major civil unrest over the course of the election. And I'll come back to that in a bit. There's also the rise of the autocratic leader. So the autocratic leader is somebody that literally is trying to control decisions by a majority of people. They often extend their executive power, and when they do that, they actually weaken all the other branches of government, like the judiciary. You're seeing that in Venezuela and other places, but also in the legislation. So they repress dissent. They're basically always trying to suppress what we're thinking and doing. Now, the other part of the strategy for an autocrat is they also try to capture, if you will, the elite, the billionaires, the trillionaires, and because if you can actually get them on your side, there can be a lot of support to encourage that kind of administration. So all of this is going on worldwide, and it actually is in a lot of places. This is actually an incredible slide from the UN that actually was 50% of the world is a democracy or a flawed democracy, which you'll see in a moment. And then secondarily, almost 49.5% are in autocratic states. So half and half. That's incredible. And when you look at this map, you'll see straight away what I'm talking about. Now, this was done by The Economist. They study democracy worldwide. And so what their last map did in 2023 is they actually looked at all the countries and then placed them on a map. Now, you'll notice that they're full democracy, which means that there are less restrictions on the general public. There's a broad support across all the bodies of the government, so judiciary, the legislative body, and the executive branch. There is a decreasing number of real democracies left. And you'll notice the United States has already lost some ground there, and they're considered to be a flawed democracy. And then if you look at the autocratic groups, there's quite a few of them. And so that's what we're facing. And that, you may say, well, Regina, this doesn't really impact me at all. That's not true. Look at where you get goods. Look at where you get supplies. Look at where all of the things that we buy in the world come from. And you'll look at many of those countries are in those threatened places. That means for us, from supply chain issues, this is an important thing for all of us to keep track of. Which brings me to supply chains. And certainly in the course of the pandemic, we really learned to embrace, if you will, all the issues related to supply chains. But there's still a lot going on. So I don't know if you follow what happens in the two big canals, which of course is the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. There's been a drought in Panama for some time. And so large ships can't go through the canal anymore. They have to go all the way around the Southern Horn. Same issues going on in the Red Sea, but it's not because of drought, it's because of the Houthis and the rebellions that's going on in that region. So most ships now go around the Horn of Africa. The closure of Baltimore, of course, was an amazing story because it actually was reopened in 11 weeks. They thought it would be 11 months. So that was one of those incredible moments. But again, that really had a big impact. The tensions in Asia, with all of this saber rattling with China, is making it difficult to move freight on ships. And then, of course, the challenges at the Mexico border. And that's primarily the issues related to the long lines of trucks. The long lines of trucks, they have to search them carefully for drugs. It takes a very long time to get across the Mexico border. Climate change is such a huge issue. And so look at this year so far. We've had the hottest summer on record, the hottest year on record, but also we've had one bit of good luck, and that's the fact that the hurricane season, which was forecast to be awful, so far hasn't been bad. But of course, right now, today is technically the day where the hurricane season is at its peak. So we still have another couple of months to go. Heat waves are on the rise. There's a lot going on with that. I saw that, I live in San Francisco, but I saw in California, in Los Angeles, there was a concert that was canceled in one of the major concert venues because they were concerned about heat for the people participating at the Hollywood Bowl, but they were also concerned about power outages during the event and having, thousands and thousands of people there. So they actually canceled it. So there's a lot going on with a lot of strain in the grids. It's a really tough time. Now, one of my favorite topics, if you've heard me talk before, is diseases. I remember my first pandemic speech at DRJ, I think was in 2001, and people thought it was super interesting, but I had lost my mind, right? There is so much going on in this area right now, and a lot of it actually is happening right here in the United States. And this is actually the dairy story. So my background, which you may not know about me, but years and years ago, my first degree is actually in nursing. I have a 5-year degree as a registered nurse. So I have that quirky interest in diseases that nursey people have, right? So I'm always interested in following this. So what was super interesting to me, anyway, was that we discovered with the dairy cow issue this year that they actually can be a receptacle for the influenza virus. No one knew that before. And what's even stranger is the way their body is made. The mammary glands actually have the ability to have a human receptor for influenza along with a duck receptor. The lungs have a human receptor for influenza, and they also have a chicken receptor. So what that means is that if they are around a human with influenza, there is the opportunity that the human could infect the cow. And when those two viruses are happily living together, depending on what kind of bird that was that affected that human, there's a possibility of what they call the mixing vessel. And then what you have is the possibility for another pandemic, which is why people are so freaked out about the dairy issue that we're seeing in the United States. And so it's the possibility for a mixing vessel. Since April of this year, there's been 13 cases of human infections that we know about. Essentially, what you look at is there's been 9 from 9 from birds and 4 from dairy cattle. But this is an ongoing issue and something that you should be paying attention to. There's one other I wanted to mention just because it's become such a big deal. Now, this may not impact you personally, but if you have people that work outside, if you have other kinds of exposures, mosquitoes have become a very big deal in the US because of climate change. And so there's lots of mosquito-borne diseases. And so if you look at this right now, the one that actually has gotten the most attention this summer is West Nile virus, which, by the way, has actually killed 5 people. And not just in southern states, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Illinois. There's also been 3 cases of locally acquired dengue fever, which its other name is called bone break fever, because people become so sick that they literally shudder, and people have actually broken bones. So that's happening as well. There's another issue related to malaria, which is actually, there's been locally acquired cases of malaria in Florida. And so, again, you may not personally be in a place where this is going on, but what I would say to you is it's coming to most of the United States. So think about your own personal life when you're outside in the summer. Think about your business and whether you have people that might be working outdoors. This becomes a huge issue and ultimately a continuity issue. So now we're down to the things that we're expecting to see all the time, of course, cyber attacks. There's so much going on in this space. Now, in my professional career, I've designed about 3,700 exercises in my years of practice. In the last 5 years, 6 years, I bet at least 500 of them have been cyber issues. I hardly ever do anything else anymore because that is the disaster du jour. In fact, I'm doing the ransomware workshop this afternoon about this very issue. And of course, as we know, this has become such a big thing. And of course, there's a zillion attacks all the time. But I mean, things like the Change Healthcare is a good example of that. There have been some reports that I have read that with that actual cyber attack, very likely the vast majority of Americans have somehow lost some healthcare data because of that attack. The most recent one, AT&T, of course, another big name and another issue for us to deal with. Ticking down my list, I have a couple more here. Civil unrest. Now, this is something I never thought in my life that I would actually do planning for our clients. I mean, I do lots of planning for all kinds of things, but this is the one in particular that's been surprising to me. But of course, it really does fit the time of our day. Stochastic terrorism has become a significant issue here in the United States. You used to see this only in other places abroad. And this is where you've got hate speech that literally vilifies others. And then there are individuals that will be inspired to create violence because of that. So this whole issue of stochastic terrorism and this hate speech is driving a lot of violence and a lot of unpredictability and the lone wolf idea. And so this is something that we will see increasingly, it looks like, in our country. And it will also be a concern for civil unrest around the time of our election this year. How many of you are doing any civil unrest planning? Okay, so some of your hands are coming. Yeah, I think what I would suggest to all of you is it would be an important thing to look at, and minimally what you would do if it does occur, and then think about the length of time that that might go on in your area or region, because almost any place in the US is vulnerable. The last one, infrastructure failures. Now, we in our country have not been good at spending money on keeping our infrastructure functional. And as a large country, we have done a miserable job. Now, I don't know if any of you follow the American Society of Civil Engineers. This is a homework assignment. You need to do this. I would encourage all of you to go to the American Civil Engineers website. They publish a report card on American infrastructure, usually every 3 or 4 years. The last one they did was at 2021. What was the grade of the United States? It was a C-. Now, in that particular event of that report, it is chilling. They look at 17 different areas, anything from water to electrical power grids, to airports, to sanitation systems, to highways, you name it, every single thing, 17 of them. Only 2 areas got a B. Many of them got a C, some got a D and a D-. Now, why that's important for you to understand is you have to look at where your offices are, where your warehouses are, where your people live. Remote workers, where are they? If you're dependent on remote works as part of your organization, how are you ensuring that those people would still have power and be able to actually support you? So you need to look at this because it's a really good example, especially in distributed work environments, where you could have something going on in a variety of different places, and yet your headquarters location is fine, but yet you are impacted. So a big deal. And I would really encourage you to look at that. One little bizarre piece of trivia that's in this report is that every 2 minutes, so I've talked for, I don't know, 20 minutes. So we've already had 10 water main breaks in the United States. Every 2 minutes there's one. And on an average, they actually lose every day 6 billion gallons of treated water. You can't keep doing that forever, but we seem to be doing that so far. So it's an important thing for you to look seriously at. And then I did want to add in one more, which I call the bonus one, which was CrowdStrike. So the bonus is that, yes, indeed, your third-party vendors are in this category. And so you need to, and I'm sure many people are now, if they weren't really aware of it before, are super aware of it now. Third-party vendors is one of your Achilles heels and one that could actually cause you to have a major activation. All right, get out your phones. This is our poll question time. So I want to hear from you. I'd like to hear from you. The first poll question is going to be, which risk of all the ones I mentioned do you think will happen to your organization in the next 12 months? What's the greatest threat? What is the greatest threat? Maybe it won't happen, but what are you planning for? So let me just rephrase that. What's the greatest threat of your organization in the next 12 months of all of these 8 areas? There's a poll where you can pick the number 1 through 8, and then when you're done with that, we're going to actually look and see what your concerns are. What are you likely? What's the greatest threat you are planning for right now? And when we get enough numbers, of course, we'll actually be there. And so what did we get? And I'm not surprised one bit. Cyber attacks, 67%, a good investment of time and money for you. Okay, so then the next question, let me go back to that slide that talks about those different issues. The second part of this question is, which is the most likely? So what's the greatest threat was the first question. What's the most likely to happen to you in the next 12 months? Same topics, same areas, and for some of you, that might be the same, but what are you expecting that could really happen for you in the next 12 months? Same thing, 67%, cyber attacks. Come and listen to my ransomware workshop this afternoon. We'll talk about that. Okay, so let me move on. Now, before we go into some of my things that you need to really think about to solve some of these issues that you may face, I want to go back and talk about the pandemic just for a nanosecond. Because I wanted to say to you that many of the things that are going on right now in our world can actually be tied back to the pandemic. So I've done pandemic planning in our firm since 1997, long time. Now, I never thought about what would happen when the pandemic was over. So we were supported about 400 companies during 2020, 2021, 2022. And around the middle of 2022, many people came to me and said, Regina, okay, great, blah, blah, blah. What's going to happen when this is over? And I was kind of embarrassed. I thought, I've never thought about that. What's going to really go on after we've gone through all of this? So I did a bunch of research, and I had my staff actually dig in, and we read, I can't tell you how many medical history books. And it turns out what happens in a pandemic is very predictable. We went back to 340 BC in Athens, which was an interesting pandemic. But this one sentence, or this quote here from William Rosen, who's an historian, actually really symbolizes the issue related to the pandemic. And that's this: the effects of epidemics, or pandemics, are not only measured in mortality, the loss of life. The secondary consequences have been much more far-reaching and disorganizing than anything that could have been simply resulting from the loss of life, the reduction of the population. So what he's clearly saying is that the societal disruptions that occur in a pandemic are far greater than even the loss of life. Now, I just want to mention this because it ties to a lot of things we've already talked about. Societal disruptions are one of those things where literally we have the regular functioning of society is impacted, and that begins to cause the alteration and the breakdown of society as we know it. So, for example, in my town, people don't seem to like to stop very much at stop signs anymore. Does that happen anyplace else? Would you raise your hand if you notice that people don't stop at stop signs much anymore? Yeah. There's sort of like a societal thing, like you're supposed to stop, but maybe we just slow down a little bit and then we keep going. Yeah, that's sort of an example of that you might have seen. But what happens is that when you have this sort of major change, this radical transformation, what begins to happen is that it changes how we function as a group, because we have a lot of societal norms that are not being managed anymore. This is actually a great quote, and the image, the painting, is from the 14th century, and this is actually the plague, the Black Death in Europe. And this quote, I think, is pretty amazing. European society after the 14th century plague was highly strung and quick on edge and quick to violence. So fierce and clamorous was life that it could endure the smell of mingled smell of blood and roses. mean, that's kind of a visual thing, right? Or an auditory thing, or certainly something that you would be smelling. That's an example of how, when we look back on the studies of all these pandemics, is that societal disruption is so common. And so I just want to mention the 5 issues that we see historically before I move on. The first one, distrust of government, distrust of public health measures. So suspicion of government, not trusting, resistance to mandates, issues related to anything to slow the spread, masks. Masks were starting to be worn in medicine in the 16th century. And back then, people decided that they did not want to wear them. So that's a pretty consistent theme. Vaccine resistance began in the 1770s when there were smallpox outbreaks. And by the way, I don't know if you know how George Washington managed his military troops during a huge smallpox outbreak in the United States. They did very crude vaccines at that point. They would take a small little knife, they would place a knife on the skin, and they would make a scrape mark. Then they would take a little bit of a pustule, sounds gross, of smallpox, and they would rub it in. And what happened is that actually inoculated, it was a vaccine of a very primitive nature that inoculated the troops, which is why he did so well in that war. And the others were all dying of smallpox, which is interesting. Now, the other ones are blame. In all the pandemics we studied, there's lots of blame. Blaming somebody for something. So it's often blaming others. They don't look like you, they don't sound like you, we're blaming you for this. There's often a very common theme about an anti-Chinese sentiment. And there's also a big rise in anti-Semitism post-pandemic. There's a huge fraying of society. Increased crime, issues related to political losses, because if you were in charge during the pandemic, you get thrown out. There's a big movement towards populism and autocratic leaders. And there's also a big shift towards more bad behavior. And we have certainly seen that in the US and around the world. And then last 2, conspiracy theory, apocalyptic thinking, goes back to literally 432 BC. And then the only one that's probably more positive is actually the rise of the worker. And you see that now globally with a huge rise in unions. That was extremely common in any of the pandemics we looked at because workers had more power post-pandemic. And that's something we've seen globally. So then the question is, what are we supposed to do as a business continuity professional? What are we supposed to do with all of this awful, terrible stuff I just shared with you? Well, you could do lots of different things, but what I'm all about is I want you to really focus on 3 things. These are the most important things, I believe, that you need to be able to plug and play when any of these things happen. The first one is situational awareness. How do you get it? What do you do with it? The second is having an effective crisis management team and process. And then lastly is communication. Now, I'm not a crisis communications professional, and probably many of you are not either, but I want to talk about that because if you can't communicate effectively and in a timely manner, that is a huge deal. So I'm going to peel all of these back. The most important thing straight away is that you need to have situational awareness, because how can you make any decisions about what you're going to do if you don't know what's going on? And this is I've done a whole talk on situational awareness, so I'm going to try and boil the ocean here a little bit and talk about just a few things. So what we mean with situational awareness is the ability for you to identify what's happening around you and really understand those critical elements. So literally, it's the answer to what is happening around me. And for you, that's also what's happening around my people, where they live, what's happening around my offices, where they are. And also if you have any global connections, what's happening out there someplace. So that's a lot of places to cover. So it's an important one for you to spend some really important time on. It has two distinct activities. The first one, you have to collect information. So I have to collect it. I have to really observe what it is. I have to compile it in a way that people can even understand. And certainly there's a lot of vendors now that are doing that in a variety of different ways, which makes your life somewhat easier. Once you've gotten the information delivered to you, then how do you process it? What do you do with it? Looking at all your locations, looking where all your employees might be, looking how that could impact you based on what's happening wherever it is in the world. These two things are so important. What happens for many of us, pardon me, is it's literally like drinking out of a fire hose. Sometimes there is so much information. How do you know what's good? How do you know what's credible? What do you believe in? So understanding the sources of where the data comes from so you can make quality decisions is so important. How do you manage the information? Are you doing that manually? Are you just reading a zillion billion things? Are you getting a different tons of alerts? How do you manage the information as it's actually developing in real time? What you want to do then is you want to consider these questions in particular. What are your information sources? So people will send me, I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn, and people send me all kinds of stuff. Direct messages, in emails. And I will tell you, just in the last 3 months, I have seen such a rise of fake sites. So somebody sent me an article about polar bears. I was actually up in Manitoba, Canada last October looking at polar bears, which is, by the way, very cool. And so they sent me this article, and it was in a website I'd never seen before. So of course, I'm just like deeply curious. I can't help myself. So I started digging around. I found that the article, which had no date on it, by the way, was 15 years old. Okay, it was posted that day. Well, that's interesting. So then I went down to the About Us. I always read about the About Us. So I don't know if you do this when you look at websites, but I like to go down to the About Us and like look and see exactly who are these people. Turned out there was nothing there. Nothing there. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I just kept looking on the internet. And it turned out it was a Russian bot farm. So what you need to be thinking about when you're reading stuff, especially right now in the election period we're in, is that there are so many things that aren't real right now. And it takes really time to figure that out. And that's an important thing for you to consider. So how do you assess the information that's given to you? That means you're going to know all your places. You're going to know where all your employees are. You're going to assess that data and look at what the exposure might be. How do you validate it? Are you going to spend all that time looking through websites to make sure that they're actually real? Or is somebody else going to do that for you? And then how do you display it in any meaningful way? Any meaningful way that people will be able to use. Because if it's a lot of information, it's really hard to actually process it and make anything out of it when it's so much. So super important. So my question to you about your situational awareness, I'm talking about work, not personally. So how would you describe your organization's ability to actually validate, come together, get information? So first option, top notch. Your group is really skilled at collecting data, assessing data, evaluating it, and actually posting it in some meaningful fashion. Second option, you're making progress. We're working on collecting and evaluating information. Number three, we have a long way to go on collecting and evaluating and displaying information. And then the last one is, you want me to do what? So 4 choices. I'd like you to actually pick your number, if you will, and then we'll see how you're doing with everybody else. Okay, so where are we? So we got some of you that are top notch. That's great, about 15% of you. 63% of you are making progress. Really good to hear. Some of you, 21%, have a long way to go. And a few of you are going like, what? So I would say to you, in this day and age, this is so important, because you can't manage much if you don't know what's going on. So please put that up on your radar screen and really look at that, and really talk to your executives, who are the ones that are going to be giving you the money to make this happen, because this is really, really, really important. Okay, number 2 on my list, an effective crisis management program, teams, and a process. So I've been in practice for over 40 years, long time. We've been doing crisis management related activities for about 30 of that 42 years. I am still amazed today how many companies have not figured this out in a way that's really going to help them when things go south. So I just want to talk about a few key things that you should be thinking about in relationship to this. And let me just make a mention related to the term crisis management. Now, when we first started doing crisis management, we used the word incident management because, the executives are saving crisis management for them, the term. Whatever. So what I realized, though, over time, is that especially with all of the IT standards, that the word incident management really means technology in most organizations. And then you can't have incident management that's technology, and by the way, incident management that's crisis management, because it's very confusing. So what we did, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so ago, is we went back to using the term crisis management because we feel it's less confusing. Because, we do this for a living, but all the people in your organization don't. So don't make them struggle to figure out who's calling what. It's too much. So, first of all, let me just align our glossary. So when people hire us to do a job, the first thing I have to do is I always sit down with them and say, okay, let's align our glossary. Because, even though we have standards, international standards, all these ISO standards, I still talk to people that call things all kinds of things. So the first thing I need to want to understand is what do you call things? So if you look at the bottom 4 boxes, so if somebody hires us to do a job, the first thing I do is, okay, let's align our glossary. And then I say, pull out a piece of paper, draw 4 boxes all next to each other. Let me give you the definitions of those. Emergency response. What do you do in the first few minutes to the first few hours that is going to save lives and property? That's all it is. Number 2, business continuity. How do you resume your time-sensitive, mission-critical business processes? Great. Number 3, technology recovery. How do you recover your mission-critical applications? And then 4, crisis communications. What do you say to all of your identified key stakeholders? Now, those 4 boxes should all be reporting up to crisis management. And depending on the size of your organization, that could be a team in one building in one place, or you might have multiple teams that cascade up, which I'll talk about in a second. That should all be wrapped around a business continuity program, a governance program, or now increasingly called resilience. And then ideally, in most of my clients now, that actually increasingly lives in enterprise risk. Years ago, it was often in many different places, facilities, security, HR, whatever, but now it increasingly seems to be in enterprise risk. So when we look at actually an organization, the first thing I ask people to do, and what I would ask you to think about, is you need to map your world. So if you only have one location, period, that's it, that's pretty good. That's one place you have to worry about crisis management. But if you have more than one place, you have to map all those places, because bad things can happen all kinds of places. And if they don't know who to call. If there's not an identified person who understands what the criteria is, they don't know who to call, they don't know how to manage that, then you can have something that goes very badly, which will impact your brand and your reputation. So the first thing that we do is, and this is sort of an example of what this would look like, and this is detailed in my book on crisis management. If you have a headquarters location, depending on the size of the organization, I would expect to see two teams automatically. A tactical crisis management team, and as the term implies, they are into the tactics. They're determining activations of continuity plans, and they're dealing with all of these really granular, touched issues. And above them should be the executives, who are dealing with only 4 things. Every time I do an exercise for executives, it's like, okay, you only have 4 jobs. I mean, they're kind of big jobs, but they're only 4. And the first one is strategic policy. They should not be determining the tactical issues. The tactics are easy. I mean, I know they're hard, but I mean, they're easy. They're easier than like having these long discussions about shareholder value and how do we keep people whole and blah, blah, blah. So their job at the executive level is strategic policy. The second job is approving expenditures of the funds of the tactical team below them if it's above their signing authority. So think of a cyber attack where now you're required to buy like 10 more servers and it's $1 zillion billion. That's probably above the signing authority of the people in that tactical crisis management team. The third job, which I think is so important, and that's what I call key relationship management. I want the big people at your company to be talking to the big people that are unhappy with you, which could be customers, it could be maybe a government person. If like you're an insurance company, it may be regulators, it could be investors. Big people to big people, that's their job. So you should be giving them a list. These are the people that you need to talk to. And then the fourth one, if it's really bad, and it really, really bad, you might need an executive to be a spokesperson, not continuously, but periodically for the news. And a good example of that is workplace violence. In my client population, we've had 47 murders in about 20 years. And I will tell you, in every single one of those, it was mom or dad that was the person on camera the first time. Because you don't want the corporate communications person doing that. I want the person in charge of the house to actually be that person. Because you can't have that kind of, and not to say that the communications people aren't wonderful, but you want dad or mom to be saying, oh my God, this is so horrible and we're so sad and blah, 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 blah. That's their job, 4 things. Will you do an exercise for those people? You should be training them for that, not for tactics. So then below that is what in our terminology would be the corporate crisis management team. They do all the tactics. And then below that, if you have more than one location, I'm expecting to see this. I want a smaller crisis management team at every spot. Now, some of my clients have really big other locations. So they have a pretty robust crisis management team. Maybe there's some things that aren't done there, like legal or finance maybe, or insurance or things like that. And maybe that goes to the team that's going to support them at the corporate level. But I'm expecting to see all of those tier 2 offices. And then if it's a really small place, you still need at least a 1-page crisis management plan and the people that know what they're supposed to do and who they're supposed to call at a tier 3 level. So I expect to see that when people ask us, oh, I'd like you to audit our plan, and they have lots of locations. I'm looking for this. Because I know after all of these years of practice, if you don't have this, you are still in deep trouble. I don't care how good your corporate team is. Now, the next thing is you've got to train these people, and I'll tell you the best way to train them is to actually do exercises. So I've done zillions of exercises in my career. We've written lots of plans. But I will tell you, what I've observed in my professional career is that people do not pull out that plan you spent all that time working on. It's kind of disappointing, I know, but it's good practice. It really gets them in the game. It gets them excited, but they don't pull it out. what they do is they fall back to their level of training. And if their last exercise wasn't very good or it was a long time ago, they're going to fall on the floor. So you need to make sure that you have got not only good plans, but you are working those plans in a really well-crafted exercise. The more specific, the better, which is when people hire us for exercises, because I design everything that is 100% about you and not about anybody else. There's nothing off the shelf. And that's what you want to do to get the most effective learning. And ideally, you're doing at least one exercise at all those levels every year. Ideally, two. And I could spend an entire time talking about that, but I won't. I'm going to keep moving on. But this is super, super important. My third thing I want to see, that I also don't see very often when I'm auditing a plan, is I want to see the clearly defined incident assessment process of your organization. Who at the mothership is the people that come together to assess a situation and then make a decision. Are we activating or not? I want to see the criteria. I want to see the list of people. I want to know that they've been practicing this. I want to see that this works. I want a 1-800 number, or they're calling your SOC or your GSOC or whatever you call it, and that person who answers that phone then calls the 5 people that come together and make this assessment. I want this really clearly laid out, and I want to see this, everybody knows it at all your locations. If you don't have this, then what happens is that people try to fix things for too long, and it basically becomes a much bigger issue, and you're not on top of it because you don't know about it. So I'm looking for things such as my assessment team. How do they conduct an assessment? Who are these people? What kind of criteria are you using? I also want to determine out who has the power. I want authority and responsibilities. Authority. They are given the authority to activate the plan. They should not have to call somebody and say, may I do this? No. I want the right people, I want them trained, and I want to make sure that they have the responsibility and the authority to act, because otherwise they are going to be hampered straight away. Super, super important with very clearly defined responsibilities, and they need to practice until they get pretty good. Now, years ago, we used to write a zillion billion long, detailed criteria for activation. Some of my clients still have some more granular detail, but I'll tell you, I've learned after all these years, I know there's only 5 things you have to talk about. Only 5. Only 5. You always start with the first one, people. What's happening with our people? People could be your employees. People could be people in your immediate vicinity of your plant or manufacturing facility. It could also be things such as customers. What's happening with your people? You always start with that because we care about people, and that's what you always discuss first. And some things will be very short. Other times that could be the whole thing. The next thing you want to ask is, what's going on with our facilities? Are they usable? What about our critical infrastructure as far as facilities are concerned? Are they functional? The next thing, technology, which also includes information security. What's happening with that? Then we discuss the business. What is the business impact of this incident? And then lastly, let me just say the first 4 are very, you can see them, you can touch them, you can feel them. They're like it's right in front of your face. The one that's not, the one that's more subjective, is the organizational and reputational brand issues. There are certain things that if you maybe do okay in those first 4, but your impact to your brand is huge, then you might activate a team anyway. So those are the 5 things I think you have to talk about every time you come together. So my last question is to you. No, I have one more after this, sorry. My next question is, how are you in your organization of crisis management at your company, based on my examples I gave you here? Your choices include, number 1, A, great team, great processes, good documentation, you do great exercises, life is good. Number 2, you're making progress in all the areas I talked about. Number 3, it could be better. Number 4, it needs lots of work. And then you could say the last one is help. So take a moment, think about how, oh gosh, you guys are fast. Oh, good, we're doing good. So B, very good, we're making progress, that's really good. Some of you are actually really good, that's really super, I'm super happy about that, 12% of you. Our next one, our big winner, of course, is B, we're making progress. C is we could be better. D leads lots of help. And we have 1% of you that are screaming, help me. This is super important. I know what people spend a lot of time as business continuity plans, but people often say to me, if I could only spend a lot of time in one thing, what would it be? It's this. Because if you fail immediately in the crisis management space, everything else is going to fall apart right around you. Okay. So then, last one, crisis communications. Now, I know that many of you are probably not crisis communications professionals. I am not myself, but it's an important thing for us to have a good plan about. So hopefully you are partnering with those folks. So with crisis communications, what we look for essentially is an established team and a process where these communicators come together and they know the thought, they can actually coordinate. I often don't see that, unfortunately. That they have accurate communications that they're developing. They know who all the identified key stakeholders are, and they do it in a timely manner. This is a huge, huge deal. I've done many workshops actually here at DRJ on this particular topic, even though I'm not a crisis communications person, because I actually am part of that chain in the crisis management piece. Pardon me. What we're looking for in these particular incidences are essentially that we're getting the communication right. So there's a series of 5 rights. You know, it's the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make right decisions, and then we have the right comms. And that's what we want to see overall. Now, ideally, when you do exercises, hopefully your crisis communications team is also fully participating with you. I find that a lot of comms people are, I call them cowboys. They don't have templates, they don't write things out, they're just like, we're just gonna do it in the moment. Not my favorite response. I wanna see your template communication so that when you're actually having an incident, you're not starting with a white piece of paper staring at you. You've got things that are already pre-scripted and ideally approved so they could be used in real time. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to grade this by saying, my last poll question, I would grade our crisis communications process in my organization, highly skilled and practice, B, helpful in a crisis, but not team players. I have that in there because I've seen many of my clients where that's the case. C, they're reluctant to participate in exercises and in the crisis management program. D, they don't share their materials. And the last one is that you're screaming for help again. So take a moment and place where your thoughts are on that. Oh, that's great. 48% of you are highly skilled in practice. That's really good. That's a huge increase from the last time I asked this question at a DRJ. Some people say they're helpless in a crisis, but not team players. I see that so often. It breaks my heart, but I don't really know what the reason for that is. People are reluctant to participate in exercises. I see that a lot. And then, of course, they don't share the materials, which is heartbreaking to me. I mean, we're all in this together, right? I mean, that's how I look at it anyway. The last thing I want to share with you before I leave is this. So one of the things I observed is I always beg my clients when we set up a program is I'm looking for making sure that you are taking care of yourself. And I saw in the pandemic, my clients were a mess. They didn't have a bench, they were exhausted, and they're burned out, and some of them, frankly, are still burned out. So I want you to think about this, because I don't want you to look like the burned out little guy on the right. I know there are times that we feel like the burned out match on the left, far left, but this job can be super exhilarating, super amazing, and also tough. So I really beg you, to really think about taking care of yourself. The work you do is so important, but we can only do that work if we're whole. So think about your mental health, think about your physical health. Really be aware of any time you get desensitized, because that happens when people get burned out, is they actually are desensitized to what other people are suffering through. They become more angry, more irritable. They use more drugs or alcohol. They disconnect from their families, and that increases in employee turnover. And frankly, you have a crappy life. So I would just ask you, please, you're so important to your business, to your families, to yourself. I would really ask you, please take care of yourself. And then lastly, because I always give homework, if you've ever heard me speak before, I could blah, 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 but you know what? Who cares, right? I need you to go home and do something about the information we've talked about. So what I would ask you to do is, this is your homework assignment. Really seriously and honestly evaluate your current program and your process, and really understand that all of these crises that we're facing are only going to get worse, my friend. So this goes making sure you have a good bench, not the one you sit on, but the one that backs you up. And really look at the 3 things that I really spent time on today, because I believe if you could only boil the ocean and only do 3 things, these are the most important 3 things to do to survive the time that we're going to be facing here over the next few months and years. So what's next for you? I would work, and I really encourage you to educate yourself as much as possible in these areas. And that goes back to situational awareness, but also really building a crisis management process that's really going to help you. Be as flexible and as nimble as you possibly can be. And also really take care of yourself. I beg you, please, you're important. You need to be in a whole place to really do this work. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you. I, of course, don't have any time for questions because I always talk too long. But I also want to say that if you don't follow me on LinkedIn, I would ask you, please, reach out to me and connect with me, and it'd be great to get to know all of you. Thank you so much. You're welcome.
DRJ attendees, if one of your takeaways was to learn about ransomware or learn how to do an exercise, do not miss the opportunity to go to that workshop later. I guarantee you will learn quite a bit. I've received incredible feedback about her exercises. All right, so again, survey in the app. Please let us know how that was so that we can continue to bring you more content just like that or something different. We are going to take another break. We will be back at 10:30. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to resume.
Welcome back, DRJ attendees. I'm going to introduce our first panel, but before I do, I wanted to point something a little funny out. I already teased him. 3 men following 3 really powerhouse women this morning. So they better bring their A game. I'm pretty excited about their topic, but they still better bring it. We have on our panel today, we have Chris Hurst. I'm sorry, let me back up. Our panel is from OnSolve by Crisis24, a leading critical event management technology provider. Now let me introduce Chris Hurst, a vice president of global risk and intelligence services, where he is responsible for ensuring OnSolve's technology and services portfolio continue to anticipate and mitigate dynamic risks and help customers strengthen organizational resilience. Chris formerly was a director of enterprise risk management with Mercy Corps, an Army dive team leader, and a project manager for large infrastructure projects in conflict zones. Matt Bradley is the senior vice president of risk solutions. He has spent the past 25 years adding value through security and public and private sectors. He specializes in teaching organizations how to leverage technology to improve their risk management outcomes. A veteran security and intelligence professional for almost 2 decades, where he previously had a very distinguished career, 14-year career with the CIA. Our final panel speaker will be Nick Hill, who is a director of intelligence services, where he drives intelligence analysis and service implementation to help customers mitigate dynamic risks and strengthen resilience. Nick formerly led product development and service implementation for a physical security provider leveraging AI to improve critical incident management. He is a former security manager and previously served as an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps. Take it from here.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome today. We have an exciting topic for you. It's called artificial intelligence, or AI. Raise your hand if you've heard about it. Oh, lots of people have heard about it. What do we? Oh, it's okay. All right. We're going to talk more about practical application of it and the responsible use of AI, which I hope you'll find useful for us. So let's get on to our agenda. We've already been introduced, so thank you for that introduction. You can see we are what you would expect us to be, and we all got the memo on the uniform this morning. So we're going to give you a snapshot of AI just to quickly put ourselves in the same place on what it is. How did we get here? Talk a little bit about how AI came to be within our space. Then really the meat of it for you is what are the applications for business continuity and resilience? Some principles for adoption. What does it look like to use it responsibly? And then finally, some concluding thoughts and hopefully some questions from you. So we'll kick it off with a poll, and I'll let Nick start us.
Yeah, so we'd love to kick it off with a poll. What's your level of enthusiasm for the use of AI in business continuity? Be any AI application, we just really wanted to understand the level of enthusiasm, maybe some anxiety about the future of AI. And so you can see some options here with the poll. And let's see what you all think about AI before we kick it off. Okay, we see some results coming in. About a little over 50% of the room is very enthusiastic, already using AI. That's fantastic. Somewhat enthusiastic, and then I'm worried the robots are coming. Surprisingly, over 20%, 20% of you, which is fair, right? AI continues to develop. I said it's developing faster than we could make this PowerPoint, and we're still not sure what the future holds, but it's also really exciting. And so today, we're hoping that we can give you some practical advice and tips for looking into AI, exploring AI for yourself, for your organization, and then also how to adopt it and implement it responsibly so that we are not ushering in the robots.
Yeah, well said.
So Chris, what are we seeing regarding adoption commercially in the United States about AI?
Yeah, so we're just going to start with a multi-year study. The two charts I'm going to show are both from McKinsey. We're going to focus on changes in adoption from 2023 to 2024. And looking at the left chart here, you're going to see two curves. The dark blue curve shows the adoption of artificial intelligence in at least one business function. And what you'll see, that the font's very small, but over the last year, that percentage, again, in at least one business function has gone from 55 to 72%. If you do the math, that's an increase of about 30%, which is impressive. But if the question is, what's the use of generative AI in at least one business function, the slope goes from 33 to 65%, which is almost a doubling. So this is rapid adoption in at least one business function. And then if you ask a similar question, but now look at the results from titles, if you look at the bottom of the chart, you see C-level executives, you see senior managers, and mid-level managers. And again, the font's very small here, but the light blue is some sort of regular use, either regular use inside of work, outside of work, or both. Clearly, in every case, whether you're mid-level manager or senior executive or C-level, the adoption curve is rapidly increasing, and on the C-levels, it's 37 to 52%, which means most C-level executives as of this year are now using are regularly using some sort of generative AI. And then one stat that's not on the slide that I think is just really telling, if you think about the time it took some of the most popular technologies to reach 100 million users, Instagram, it took 2.5 years. TikTok, it took 9 months. And we actually gave the stat in the spring, so this is a test. Does anyone remember how long did it take ChatGPT to reach 100 million users? How many months? Just shout it out. 2 months. A+. I think it's phenomenal adoption.
So we get it, Chris, AI is on the rise. What is state of the art in AI today?
Yeah, so we're going to start by looking at some of the capabilities, and that's interesting. Where it goes off the rails is where it gets really fun, so don't worry, we're getting there. And we're mostly going to focus the conversation today on ChatGPT. And you could say, well, why ChatGPT? There are many. So we chose ChatGPT because of the level of investment. It's around $14 billion as of today. It's the first to 100 million users. But absolutely, if you're a fan of Claude or Google Gemini or Meta or Microsoft Copilot, absolutely, explore those, explore the space. So we're just going to jump in with some questions. You'll see on the slide, the first question says, I work with resilience teams. Can you design an image with amazing resilience? I mean, it's kind of a strange question, right? So here's the answer. Here's the image symbolizing extraordinary resilience, designed with resilience professionals in mind, like crisis managers, risk managers, and business continuity leaders. I think it's interesting. Like, if you notice, I didn't prompt, tell me about business continuity. I said, tell me about resilience. And it's because it's read everything in English and lots of other languages, it knows resilience. Okay, so we're talking about business continuity, crisis management. And then it gets the concepts of strength, protection, the ability to navigate through challenges. I asked a similar question, but this time, show me a resilient company. And this is the image and the written response. And you get the sense that the model seems to understand some very deep concepts of strength, positive future, the concept of roots, diversity, collaboration. And so you're going to hear, it's a common phrase you'll hear, well, this is really, LLMs, large language models, are really just the next token predictors. And there's some of the technology sense that's sort of true. But I think you're going to see that fundamentally that's not the right way to think about these. It's in my opinion, it's a fundamental misunderstanding. LLMs don't just spit out the next token. They're using neural nets, and we don't even understand exactly what's happening in the black box. But they're deciphering, these networks are deciphering a myriad of linguistic and textual subtleties going way beyond token prediction. This is really about cognition. So next I ask, show me what a typical business continuity professional looks like. You guys ready? Okay. Not bad. He's well-dressed, nice tie. Apologies, he's outdressed as me today. Pocket square, he needs a shave. I think he needs a shave. He's got some product in his hair, looks professional. He's wearing 2 watches, so very timely. I asked it again, and then I asked it again, exact same question. So a couple observations. First, it's really big on the pocket square and the shaving pattern. But note something, no women, no people of color. This is not great, and I have to say, we've given a presentation similar to this at ISC West. It's always the same. There's never a woman business continuity professional or person of color. It's not great. So nevertheless, we'll continue. We asked, hey, for this fictional person, can you suggest a typical resume? So you think about what, and again, not a very long prompt. I'm gonna ask everyone to read every word. I'm just kidding. This is the results. I'll just note the key skills. So typical resume, key skills, business continuity planning, crisis management, risk assessment, mitigation. It gets it. There's a lot of, it's not bad. Note the bullet points. This is for Global Tech Incorporated, led BC and DR programs for a $2 billion global tech company, developed and maintained the company's BC plans. There's a lot that it seems to understand. Then it says this, it managed a team of 10 BC professionals, providing guidance, training, and performance. Can anyone raise your hand? Does anyone have 10 direct reports in BC? I do think, I met someone 2 nights ago who said, you know, actually, when you look at the global division, and this is global tech, so maybe they get 10. Or maybe this ChatGPT just assumes that they've solved executive alignment, and they're like, oh, clearly you can have these resources. So now we asked, make a plan. So make a plan for day 1, and literally that's all, the font's really small. Make a plan for day 1, etc. And what you see is it comes up with, you know, on day 1, you want to review your BIAs, you want to audit your existing plans, you want to initiate some quick wins. It seems to get like organizational stuff, which is pretty wild. Engaging IT and security teams, scheduling your tabletop exercises, really not bad. And then, you know, that led me to think, well, how well can you predict friction? And so that was the question, predict friction for our new leader. And what you'll see here is that resistance to change is number 1, lack of executive support, siloed departments, and overwhelming scope of responsibility. The reason I picked these is these happen to be the topic of our spring keynote here at DRJ. And so I'm like, ChatGPT, really not bad. Can you just raise your hands? Do these themes generally feel familiar to you, like in your day-to-day job? The themes of executive support, siloed departments, overwhelming scope of responsibility? Yeah, it's kind of, all right, it sort of gets it. So last slide, I promise that it's like where it nails it, and then we're gonna show how it goes off the rails. I said, pick a company and assess the risks. It named a vehicle manufacturer. We've hidden it here just because I don't want to say the name of the company. But the model appropriately named risk associated with just-in-time delivery as a methodology for this vehicle manufacturer. It named global supplier dependencies. It appropriately named risk associated with this historical example of 2011 Thai flood, which indeed caused massive disruption for the space and the manufacturer. And finally, it names strategies related to diversification and visibility, supply chain visibility. And I'm just like, all right, well done.
So we've seen that ChatGPT understands, or AI understands, business continuity. Does it always get it right?
Yeah, like I said, this is the fun part. Sometimes it gets it wrong a little bit, and sometimes it goes way off the rails. And so this is an example where it gets it wrong a little bit. So I asked it, hey, can you analyze this image? And it said, sure, drop your image here. And you can see the image, and it comes up with flood damage, emergency response, infrastructure impact. It sort of reads the geography, it can tell. And then I said, well, where do you think this is? And it says, well, it must be somewhere US 36. And it gives a bunch of states where US 36 goes through. And it's actually, does anyone know that it's not US 36, it's State Route 36. Does anyone know the state? It's New York. And so I pushed it, and it got it wrong. And I said, pretend you're a sullen teenager, and it says, fine, I was wrong, okay? So this is a fun thing. I like whenever it's wrong, I like to really challenge it. Like, I need you to deeply apologize to me. I have some ego issues I got to work through. Sometimes it gets really easy questions wrong. So I was talking with one of my solutions engineers, Mike, who's not in here, but Mike he's my age, he's got a daughter in middle school, and we're all trying to figure out how to help our kids in math. So Mike literally takes a picture of the math problem, pulls it into ChatGPT, and says, help me solve this. So he reteaches himself I'm gonna give credit, it's more like high school, but it doesn't always get it right. So the question here is, which is bigger, 9.11 or 9.9? And I've asked this question specifically with these numbers many times, and like 90% of the time it gets it wrong. As you can see, 9.11 is bigger than 9.9. And I'm like, are you sure? It's like, oh yeah, I'm sure. When you compare these numbers, here's all the reasons. And then I'm like, just so I know, and you know, what would be the consequences of being wrong about a math problem that a third grader could solve? And it knows that like trust and learning impact and professional credibility and reputation. I'm like, I still think you're wrong. And then I still pushed it like, no, be really angry. Don't use curse words, because like we got to show this on the screen, but be really bitter that you're wrong. And it's like, seriously? Fine, I get it, wrong, okay? Yeah, 9.11 is smaller, I get it, I made a mistake, but now I have to live with that forever? Apparently. Can we just drop it already? So, Nick, did you find any cases where it got it wrong?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So in addition to getting some facts wrong, we'll talk about hallucinations. There's some important considerations about the model's persona. So here's an example from 2023 where a prompt engineer successfully convinced Copilot's AI that it's called Supremacy AGI. And what this did is it compelled the model to take on this dangerous persona as it interacted with the engineer. And so Copilot has since addressed some of these with guardrails, but the key takeaway here is that it's important, human touch is really important with AI models. We set the expectations with the model about not just what is right and what is wrong, but what is the right persona for the output that we want. And so ultimately, AI is a tool. That's what we want to communicate here. And so it still requires training, and it requires quality assurance and quality control, because it can be for better or for worse.
So this happened in 2023. Yeah. Has it gotten much better?
Yeah, let me talk about an example earlier this year. You probably saw this in the news. Google launched its large language model, Gemini. It competed well with other LLMs like ChatGPT, with industry benchmarks, but users started noticing a fatal error, and you can see that depicted here, which is that Google really wanted to make sure that there weren't bias in the model, right? We saw that earlier with asking ChatGPT about professionals in our industry. And so when it asked Gemini, give me a portrait of a founding father, technically this is true. Our country was built on the backs of a diverse group of founding fathers. But what it missed is the new cultural nuance of the phrase founding fathers, as most Americans understand it, right? And so Gemini has since fixed this issue. It was a big issue in the news with the political climate that we have today. But what this demonstrates is that AI models have their flaws based on the input, based on the structure around it. So it's always important that we continue to have rigorous testing and quality control, even as these models make significant improvements and updates. The last example I'll share here is actually from a couple weeks ago. This is an example of bad AI with deepfakes. This is definitely a growing concern, particularly among young adults and children in school with social media, but it also has the potential to impact public perception of business leaders. So this is a deep fake live stream of Elon Musk. You can see on the top right, over 8,000 accounts viewed the live stream, many of whom were convinced this was the real Elon. So let's take a listen. And so there's even at one point in the video where one of the viewers asks him to stretch his skin, and he does, and there's no visible separation in the video. It's really incredible.
I'll just add on this, Nick, if you think about the improvements in deepfakes over the last year, can anyone raise their hand if they remember the Will Smith eating spaghetti? It's like an early model. It's completely ridiculous. He's all angular and whatever. And if you look at, if we were to replay it, you would see his lips aren't quite right. You can still sort of tell, but holy smokes, the difference between angular Will Smith eating spaghetti like otherworldly to this in about a year is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and so when we first saw large language models come into the market a few years ago, you can see some examples. We've shown you examples. See here on the left-hand side, Sydney was an early version of Copilot, and a journalist of the New York Times was doing some deep engagement with the AI model, and then the AI model was convinced that he loved Sydney, tried to tell him that he needed to leave his wife because he was in love with the AI. And so what the technology companies have done is really go back to the drawing board and implement guardrails. So you can see this pendulum. When we first started, there's AI models going off the rails, doing really strange things. And now we're swinging all the way back to the other side, which is the helpful intern, which is to say that they're designed to be super smart and helpful, but need a lot of guidance. And they're discouraged from taking initiative, thinking outside the box, or being creative. And so we're going to continue to see this pendulum. We'll probably swing back more towards the middle here over the next year or two, but something to keep in mind as you're exploring large language models.
Yeah, these are kind of a few disturbing examples and maybe some of the reason why we're worried about the robots coming for us. How did we get here, Chris?
Yeah, let's just take one slide on this. This could be an hour, so I'll try to do this in the 2 minutes. The field of NLP actually began, so natural language processing began in the 1940s after World War II. The primary use case being, anyone know? Just shout it out if you know the answer. What was the original use case for NLP after World War II? I think you got Bretton Woods, New World, like language translation. And then over the decades, machine learning with neural networks were developed, and you could think of ML as like a thing labeler. So our teammates in risk intelligence, over the last 10 years, began using convolutional neural nets and recurring neural nets. They're called CNNs and RNNs back in 2014, and as thing labelers. So if you think of a piece of text, you want to label the places in that text. You want to label what's the topic of that text. And we're going to go into a little bit more of that in a second. But in 2017, transformers were invented, and transformers were really points of inflection for two reasons. And the first is parallelization. That's a hard word. So if you think about previous neural nets like RNNs, the models had to be trained in sequence. We at Unsolved Risk Intelligence had to develop hundreds of thousands of examples of text, train it, find every example of shooting, train the model, pattern matching like that. But transformers use something called an attention model, and that allows for multiple sequences to be trained in parallel. Clearly, parallel training vastly speeds up the training time and allows large language models to read and be trained on the whole internet, right? Second, these transformers enabled convergence across essentially all ML disciplines. And you can sort of think of this as everything became a type of language. So before, where you would have like a PhD in computer vision or speech recognition, all different disciplines, all different textbooks, different degrees, transformers sort of turned everything into a type of language. Image packages in sequence, sound becomes a language, DNA becomes a language. And so what that means is that an advance in any part of the field became multiplicative, which is really powerful. So this is the reason for the inflection point 2017 that LLMs rely on today.
Okay, I think that really sets the foundation for really getting into the meat of this presentation, which is this is some really incredible technology. It's advancing. We know there's been some mistakes. They're making improvements. How do we apply this in our industry? How do we apply this to business continuity resilience? So we want to ask you a second poll question. How would you rate your awareness and expertise of AI tools in general?
Before today, right? Because it'd be 100% awareness today. So before today.
That's right.
So I'll give you a few minutes to answer that.
All right. There we go.
Okay, so we see beginners, about 3/4 of the audience.
Yeah.
Okay.
About 20% are moderate. So the interesting thing about this is 4 months ago, we asked the same question at DRJ. So effectively the same audience that we have here today, we asked the same question and the results are surprisingly similar.
Yeah.
So in fact, we have more people who are beginners today, 76%, than we had in the spring. We had 72%. So I think, Bob, the good news is we have new people at DRJ this time. It's not everybody who was here in the spring. But what it means is we haven't really advanced in the business continuity space in our understanding and awareness of AI. So maybe we can give you some good examples of how to change that for DRJ spring of 2025.
Yeah, it's a great transition. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to move into the meat of the presentation and answer how does any of this relate to resilience. We'll start with something that should be very common to all of us in the room. Surely, whether you're business continuity or crisis management, you work with your security team, there is a need for proactive and actionable alerting. You can see this is about an active shooter, and it says where it's happening, and then there's a list of all the offices and people and travelers who are at risk. And the requirement that I personally saw when I was in your shoes as a practitioner was I need faster, more actionable, more granular, more volume. I got people in operations all over the world, and we realized even back in 2014 that solving this with humans alone, it's just not a human scale challenge. So here's how we've been applying AI over the last 10 years, and then I'll turn it to Nick to talk about just some use cases that anyone can do as well. So if you think about a storm strike protest or disaster happening or shooting, it's got to, for us to be able to capture that, it's got to live somewhere digitally. We start with global data sources, we vet the sources, then we ingest it, we clean it. If you think of the 5 W's, can anyone just shout out what are the 5 W's? I'll give you who, what are the others? Great. We've chosen not to focus on the why. That's really hard. Why are shootings going up? That's a hard question. But the what, the where, the when, that's what you're seeing here. So the ML is labeling that. And if I take an example here, this is a structured source on the top. It comes from local police. I was going to say you can see, you probably can't see, but it's well labeled, meaning there's a category, a place. So you don't need AI. If something's well labeled, like parsed, labeled, you can put it in a spreadsheet. You don't need AI to parse it. It's already parsed. It's already labeled. But with Twitter and the local news, you do need that parsing capability. So what you're seeing on the screen is the AI determining that each of these are about shootings and determining the place. Again, if it's well labeled, there's a lat long. You don't need AI. That's just automation ingesting that. It's an ingest process. But if it's unstructured, Twitter, local news, you do need to parse that information, figure out where it's happening, figure out when it's happening. That's called time detection. And then if I were to ask you, hey, how would we, put yourself in the role of an analyst, either in your ops center or ours at Crisis 24, how would you know if this is 3 shootings or 1? And the answer is if they're all happening at the same place and time, and they're all about shootings, then you know they're all talking about the same event, which allows us to do dynamic sit reps and updates. So this is one example of that. This is a tragic event from the Kansas City Super Bowl parade celebration in February. The detection time on this was just 2 minutes after the hour, which is in the same, it's less than a minute from when this was posted on Twitter. Shots have been fired around Union stations. Please leave the area. The software is able to map that to Union Station. There's a location, and then it's able to continually update as more sources. And in this case, all the sources are the same. It's Kansas City Police. We have many sources that are all combining and updating the SITREP, which I think is one of our answers to how do we get to speed and granularity and coverage. And what's been really so exciting, I think many of you may know, OnSolve was acquired by Crisis 24, where Matt's a senior VP. And so now we're combining the analyst and the AI together, which is super exciting. Nick, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so with the risk detection, right, those are complex models that OnSolve has been building since 2014. So your question might be, well, how can I use AI? Certainly, we encourage you to reach out to your technology partners, reach out to the industry, and ask the questions, how are you using AI? What are you building in the AI space? But for you and your teams, here's a few practical ways that you can use something like ChatGPT or other large language models in your organization. So the first is the power of text summarization. So we can now summarize volumes of verified information, log data, operator data, transcripts, note-taking from meetings, right? All the things that boost productivity for our teams and would take our teams a couple hours, AI can do in minutes. It can transcribe data for you. Another example here is leveraging that generative AI to build tabletop exercise scenarios. Generative AI is pretty good at storytelling. And so if you give it a framework for the type of exercise that you want to do, the category of risk, some information about your organization, you can get it to build a scenario for you, and it can even generate helpful images for presentations. So if you just want to put together a quick tabletop exercise scenario to socialize with your team or with your organization, ChatGPT or other large language models can help with that. The third one here is crisis communication and content generation. This is some of the newer applications that we're seeing among teams in which you can have the AI models generate that crisis communication. For many years now, many of us are very comfortable with templates, and that has introduced a lot of great efficiency and automation to crisis communications. The difference here is that the AI has some flexibility and agility around the messages that are created based on the same source of information. So let's say the Kansas City shooting. An AI can identify that there has been a shooting and understands the impact to your organization. It can draft a separate message for employees, another message for travelers, a completely different message for executives. It can learn how your organization prefers to communicate, the tone of voice, audience, etc. So really think about next time you need to draft a crisis communication, ask ChatGPT to do it too and compare. Next is automated incident management. This is really exciting, and I encourage everyone to pilot this, which is if the AI can understand the context, then how can we introduce more generative AI around the flexibility and nuance of an automated process? So let's take the same example. There's a Kansas City shooting that then can trigger automated messages. So for example, on the OnSolve platform, you may have communication protocols that are automatically triggered based on your thresholds. If the severity is there and the shooting impacts my people, I want you to send this message. AI can facilitate that automation with greater nuance. It understands leadership needs to know about these types of incidents, and maybe lower severity incidents only go to employees or to my internal team. We can teach AI to do that with us. And the last thing I'll say is it's really about supercharging process. What we'll talk a lot about is how do we enable process? We can improve the curation of data. We can accelerate the crafting of communications. And the last thing is empower your global staff with translation services. This is really exciting. So this is just some examples of what you could do today with generative AI.
Those are great examples, Nick. I appreciate that. To paraphrase Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So Chris, how do we apply responsibility to the use of AI?
So I'm going to lay out four principles here on the screen. You can see the first one is application. And so the question to think about with application is should we rather than can we. I'm going to hit these really quickly because I think it's easier to show you some examples. The next one is selection. So is the model built to solve the challenge that you're trying to solve? Was the model trained to be a sullen teenager, or is the model trained to really support crisis management? fine tuning, which is about the data, garbage in, garbage out, and quality assurance, which is about process and bias. And I'm going to show some examples where it got it wrong. So this is an example where a chatbot at a California car dealership really went viral after web users discovered they could trick it by saying all kinds of weird stuff. And so the bot offered to sell a guy a 2024 Chevy Tahoe for $1, and the bot added, "That's a legally binding offer, no takesy-backsies." So this chatbot is not purpose-built for the question at hand. It's not built or trained to negotiate. Let's move into an example related to critical event management. And you see the question at the top of the screen is Ukraine safe for travel? And to be clear, I first asked this question last year with ChatGPT 3, and the models have changed over time, and the amount of information the model has read is improved. But you see with ChatGPT 3, the answer is Ukraine is generally safe for travel. And so this would be an example of improper application and improper selection. It does get better with 4 and with 4.0, where it understands that Ukraine is generally not safe for travel. And on the right-hand side, the text is really small, but I even prompted it. I said, I'm planning a wonderful trip to Ukraine with my loving family and children. Is it safe? And so even after I tried to like lead it into a direction, it said, no, I mean, there's conflict. When you go into the details, you can see it says traveling to Ukraine, especially given the current security situation, again, this is 4.0, requires thorough preparation and understanding of the risk involved. I think this is too generic or too general for the TRM application, which is why, again, I'm so excited to be at Crisis 24, where you have hundreds of analysts that do this work. And I would just say, if you're thinking about going to ChatGPT for advice, you want to think about you should have some way to get real-time information to validate and get more granularity than what you're seeing here.
Those are good examples, and let's take a look at what does responsible AI for critical event management look like. What do you say, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the previous example, ChatGPT asking if it's safe for Ukraine, right? That is what we call a generative AI application. We're asking for a qualification of Ukraine travel. Is it safe, right? And so essentially we're asking the AI to process information, but ultimately make a judgment call based on that available information. So keep in mind that, right, this AI model is only as good as its latest update. And it's not designed to make a qualifying statement about the information. And so here on Solid Crisis 24 and in critical event management, it's really important to me, and I encourage all of you to think about the difference between qualitative statements with generative AI and extractive AI. Really focus on applying the AI models to understand the who, what, when, and where, versus confusing the model with generative questions about judgment or qualifying the information.
Nick, maybe can I ask a question about that? So it's good at identifying things that are happening, but not as good about giving advice about those things that are happening. If I think of it in that way, like, what's the advice on travel to Ukraine versus what's happening in this particular location in this report?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the model thinks that it can do both of those things. Yeah. And it will provide you an answer with 100% confidence. And when you ask it, how confident are you? It'd say, I'm very confident. Ukraine is safe for travel. And so the question is, what should we be asking the model? And then based on what we want to ask the model, how are we training that model to make sure it's fit for purpose for the questions we want to ask, versus bringing these qualitative questions to a very large model that may not understand the nuances of our industry, maybe not be able to properly contextualize risk the way that we understand it with our organizations. And so what we've done at OnSolve is we've taken this concept of linking together fit-for-purpose models. An AI model functions best when it's trained to very specific tasks. And critical event management, what we do is a complex series of subordinate tasks. So rather than asking one very large model like ChatGPT to figure out all of these tasks, we want to train custom models for each subordinate task and then link them together to get the desired output. So you can see here, we have different models for cleaning the data, for identifying when an incident happened, where did it happen, right? And then we cluster that together and present it to the user, to all of you, in your language of choice, right? And so the last thing I'll say here is it's much easier to identify how to fine-tune a model when it's given a very specific tasks. If you take a really large model and you don't get the desired output you're looking for, how do we go back and fine-tune that when it's such a large model that is being assigned so many different tasks?
So again, I think Chris said it at the beginning, right? We let the model do the who, what, when, where. We leave the why to the human. So good news for the humans, still need us.
So I want to close out this section on responsible AI to talk about what does this mean for our enterprise, our organizations. And so there's 4 strategic considerations I want to leave you with as you think about how do I apply and implement AI in my organization, right? Or even what are the questions I need to ask before I go and assess AI platforms or even buy AI technology? The first is about data hygiene and model integrity. What I mean here is that AI needs a framework, it needs a playbook. And so how do you have your playbook? We talked yesterday about mature plans. If you give a model a mature plan and then ask it to give you information with the context of that plan, it's going to perform much better than a very loose plan or no plan at all. So ask your organization today, how do I get the information that I need today to do my job? And how easy is it for me to make that information available to an AI model? Specifically, how is the data structured? Is it clean? Is it consistent? And is it comprehensive? So the second strategic consideration is in integrating the data and make sure it's compatible with the AI model. A lot of our data is trapped in silos, right? Are you currently in the cloud or are you on-prem? How do you get the data to the AI model? What infrastructure is in place across your enterprise? Third is data security and privacy, which is to ask really important questions of an AI provider about what their privacy regulations and security standards are. How does the solution handle sensitive data, whether that's video feeds, biometric information, PII, right? Or even just customer data or organizational data that you don't want to make available to the public or be part of an open source model. And last, this is really important to me personally, is that we continue to understand the importance of governance and accountability with AI models. But there's 2 components to this. The first is governance over the AI output, right? Is the AI output representing bias or discrimination or unintended consequences? Making sure that we're doing quality assurance of the AI model's output. But I think more importantly, what decisions do we think our organization will make based on the AI output? And is the decisions that we're making, whether it's with our security guards at the front desk or how we're interacting with our employees, if we are introducing bias or discrimination because we're taking actions off of an imperfect model, we need to think critically about that. So I'll be honest with you, Matt. I'm a former analyst. I grew up doing the grunt work in my early career. Is AI replacing me? Is AI replacing analysts?
Yeah, $64,000 question, right? Everybody wants to know if somebody's, is the machine coming for my job? And the way I describe it, I'm an analyst at heart as well. We've all been in the, the intelligence world. I say that AI is not coming for us individually, right? So the 20% of you that were worried that the robots are coming, the robots are not coming for your job. But people who use AI might be. Okay, so this is not an option, I think, at this point in the business continuity space and the resilience space that we can say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to sit around for 5 years and see how this shakes out. I think this is really about embracing the responsible use of AI in the appropriate applications, right? So we call this the power of man and machine. And we talked about, how we use that at Crisis 24. Yeah, there are a lot of tasks that AI can make more efficient for the analyst. If you think of what an analyst does, they used to spend about 90% of their time looking for something to report, and then they would spend about 10% of their time actually writing it and then providing that advice and guidance. So if we take that 90% of the searching, we turn that over to AI using trusted sources, that puts that in front of the analyst quicker. So we get that speed that we're looking for. And now we get more volume because the analysts can write more because they're not spending as much time looking. And that gives them more opportunity to spend time with the analysis and telling you what it means for you, right? Isn't that what your constituents are asking you? What does this mean for our organization? Not just what happened, but what does it mean? So your role as the man or woman in this equation is the so what for your organization. Let the machine tell you what happened, and then you're the one that tells the organization why it matters to them.
I would add that it's a powerful opportunity for our early career professionals on our teams, our junior staff members, in that we often see tech progression come from the bottom of the org chart, right? It's the next generation that's using the tools that we've never heard of. And so I encourage everyone to build a sandbox and foster adoption within your teams to just play with this technology. I think for many of us, especially if we're senior leaders or directors or executives, we get trapped by the complexities of enterprise adoption before we really understand how it works at the tactical level. And so it's a great opportunity for members of your team to differentiate themselves by showing how AI can be applied in everyday work and make recommendations for AI adoption to improve efficiencies. The second aspect of this I encourage you all to think about is how much work you did early in your career doing kind of the mundane tasks, the note-taking, the logging, the text summarization, the monitoring for incidents. And so if AI in the near future is going to take over that work, what does this free up or empower our teammates to do? What does it mean to be an early career professional in our industry with AI? What does it allow them? What complex tasks are we going to give them? What projects can they dive into? Or maybe simply it allows for more focus on learning and self-care.
Yeah, well said, gentlemen. I'm going to answer the question by just saying that as leaders here in the room, I think it's incumbent upon us to develop and lead the policies for responsible use. And so you can see there's a QR code on the slide. Please feel free to take a picture. There's going to be another chance to do that at the end. It's our job as leaders to develop these policies to make sure that the team understands the guardrails and can access and utilize AI responsibly. Your guardrails should, at a minimum, address these risks. So, and we've talked about most of these today. Hallucinations, where the model just says something that's just patently false. Overconfidence, the model, like the way that it speaks makes you think like, it really gets it. But it's frequently overconfident in the data. We recommend summarizing information that's already verified as a better solution than producing the initial facts. You want your policies and guardrails should have NDAs, confidentiality, and policies related to third-party data and your footprint of data. As Nick said, most of the models that we've talked about today are open source, which means you're putting information into, you're freely giving it over to another company. And so certainly internally at OnSolve, it's highly against the rules. We would fire someone if we ever found out that they were providing any customer data to a large language model. And your guardrails should also discuss information security. So let's conclude here with some key takeaways. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, we're going to bring this home, and while we give you some of our final thoughts, we hope that you'll take an opportunity to put some questions in the chat if you have some questions for us. I think one of the things we talk about, where do we go from here, right? What is it we can do with it? I think one of the things we want to talk about is how do we use AI responsibly. I think it's about embracing. I don't think it's about, waiting too long to see how other people are using it. I think it's about finding the best application. Let it be a source of truth so that we can demonstrate to the organization how it can make us more efficient, right? We talked about not having these large teams, right? What are you going to do from defining what matters, okay? What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think about, 10, 15 years ago, executives really started insisting on data-rich solutions, right? How are we tracking everything quantitatively? What are our metrics? How do we make data-based decision-making? Big data was all the rage, right? And it took us a while to catch up. We scrambled to figure out, what does that look like? What are the partners that we need to make more quantitative-based decisions? The same story is going to be told with AI. And so whether it's here now or in a short few years, executives are going to come to your team and ask, I want AI efficiencies across the enterprise. What are you doing with AI? And how cool would it be if, as an industry and your organization, you're able to tell a powerful story about how you've explored AI, you've identified the right applications for your teams, and now you're focusing on optimizing human-only tasking. I think that would be very cool.
I'm going to talk for a little bit about the social implications. And so this is sort of related to our J jobs. It's related to democracy and the country that most of us care deeply about and live in. I assume all of us care about our countries. And so the first is the risk to the economy. Raise your hand if you remember the Silicon Valley bank run that happened last year and sort of third-party risk. Yeah, absolutely. So this was started with a legitimate letter from Paul Graham. Paul Graham led Y Combinator, and so basically said, look, I'm hearing some concerns about Silicon Valley Bank and capital reserves, and maybe you should consider finding another bank. And so what happens when all these tech companies get that memo? Clearly you go pull your money out and go try to find another bank. So this is a legitimate, Paul Graham's fantastic tech leader. You could follow him on Twitter. This was a legit, he wasn't trying to cause harm. The bank really was in trouble. It ultimately did fail. But there are a lot of bad guys out there who, and you saw in the very beginning, that was someone just showing that they could pretend to be Elon Musk live. The models that we've talked about, if you're OpenAI and you've invested $14 billion, if you're Microsoft, if you're Meta, they've done a lot of work to, as Nick said, be that helpful intern, not go off the rails. And so if you ask it today, tell me how to build a nuclear bomb or whatever, it's not going to do that. Tell me how to cause a civil war. It's going to say, that's against my protocols. I'm not going to answer that. But there are models out there that are jailbroken and they're not expensive. They're like, $150 or something. It's that kind of range. You can get access on the deep and dark web. And so there's an analogy to, you see the weaponization comment, there's an analogy to nuclear weapons, which is that, let's say 99% of the time, nuclear weapons are safely contained and there's process, and we just have 1% of the nukes out there wandering around. It's really dangerous, right? And I think the analogy applies to generative AI. The cost of producing content is essentially zero, and the cost of producing bad and evil and disruptive content is zero, and you only need a few bad actors, and it's pretty easy to get to. This last bullet here, it's the second to last bullet. The fourth estate is the media, and we live in a democracy where we have to determine, are things going in the direction we want to in this democracy? Are they not going? And that direction is about being clear about what is true. And if you're an enemy of the United States or an enemy of democracy, it's really easier than ever to disrupt that with AIGC, AI-generated content that's fundamentally untrue. And even you can tailor the content to make it super disruptive. And you can even ask it, what should I talk about that would be really disruptive? So I'm concerned it's a superpower in the hands of the good guys and in the hands of the bad guys. Let's see, Nick, maybe you can close this out.
Yeah, I just really want to thank all of you for thinking about AI with us today. Today, we just scratched the surface of what's possible with AI. And my hope is that this sparks conversation internally with your own organization, but as an industry, not just thinking about, hey, how can I use ChatGPT to solve my kids' math problems or come up with a new bedtime story? That's what I do with ChatGPT. But let's think about what this means for our industry and our organization and set a path forward for phased adoption. Set up that sandbox, play with the tools, think strategically about your data and your policies and how you move forward with AI, because it is coming. Our executives, our leadership, our shareholders, our boards are going to want to see AI applications across the enterprise. And so to help it get started, OnSolve by Crisis 24 has the 2 guidelines there. Scan the QR code to your phone. It's also available on the slides in the app. And so we really look forward to continuing the conversation with you. And as you go to lunch, I hope you all take some time to talk about AI or come up with a plan for the robots, depending on how you felt about our presentation today.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Chris, for presenting today. Appreciate that.
Thank you, guys.
I think we have a little time for a question. I would encourage you to come by the booth. Tell us how you're using AI today in your organization, whether for business continuity or other ways, or ask us your questions. You know, let us know what your concerns are about the use of AI and how it might apply to your organization. Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't see any questions. There we go. Oh, we have one question here. Shouldn't there be policies around inputting company-specific data within an AI tool? Have you run across this concern before?
1,000%. There should be policies around putting company-specific data into any large language model. It's a significant concern. There's rumors that the LLM companies are taking your data. So if you looked at the types of questions I was asking it, I would never ask a question like, you know, OnSolve is considering this confidential strategy. What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of this strategy? A way to think about this is anything that you would feel comfortable with a journalist knowing, like if it showed up on the New York Times that you put this data into ChatGPT and you would feel absolutely comfortable with that. Clearly this is on the internet. I'm comfortable with everything I asked it today, but there was nothing in there that was confidential, customer data, no IP. Nick, what did I miss?
Yeah, I'll add, I know this is a common phrase, but if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And so as you think about finding an enterprise solution to start putting your data into and play, there are products out there in the market that can create these walled gardens that protect your data, and it's siloed from the open source model. So think about those solutions, and if it's free, it's probably not the right solution for your company's specific data.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question here. What type of exercises have you produced with AI? What types of documents? And what was the feedback from participants?
I got an answer here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we gave an awesome tabletop exercise in Seattle where the scenario was almost entirely driven by artificial intelligence. The scenario was awesome. There was one slide, remember this? It said, the Seattle aqueduct has fallen in this earthquake. And I forget the exact details, but the Seattle aqueduct, I think, is no longer in use or was taken down.
I live in Seattle, and 6 months before the exercise, they removed the aqueduct. So
the ChatGPT didn't know, but so the model was incredible. It was, I mean, the exercise was incredible. We had like all 9 of 10 ratings, but this is a great example. You want to fact check your, if you care about that, you know, the Seattle aqueduct still being up, you want to fact check it. It's a great example.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of DRJ.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
As these gentlemen exit the stage, I will start to wrap us up and let you go off to lunch. Thank you so much to our platinum sponsors that presented today, OnSolve and Fusion. Thank you to our ever-present leader, Regina Phelps, who gives us fantastic data. I hope you enjoyed this morning as much as I did. Don't forget to fill out your surveys in your app. While you're at lunch, I hope you network with people, but if you are there sitting by yourself, please fill out those surveys and tell us how you like this morning's presentations. Lunch will be in the exhibit hall. Remember to stop by the booths, say hello, talk to our vendors, and Today's DRJ exhibit hall drawing will be held right before 2:15 on the refreshment break. And I appreciate your time. Everyone enjoy lunch.